In terms of requests, so that's balanced with it being summertime. So
Sure.
just general, the opportunities differ. But I think in terms of what we've been looking at is the efficiency in terms of the timing of the process, figuring out where the bottlenecks are, which happen long before they make it to me. It is also what those requests are for. So security aside, nutrition aside, facilities aside, what we know, who else is in need of transportation or in need of overtime. It also helps us take a look at, should some folks just be salaried? If they're working, when you hear about people being overworked, money doesn't always satisfy the issue. And so do we need to take a deeper look at the types of positions or titles or departments, whatever it might be, that may need a deeper look?
Thank you for that. You've shared the compensation analysis and deeper HR work that in one-on-one and what we are exploring. Are you concerned that a policy change before having that deeper analysis are we making an unnecessary policy change before we change the business operations piece and get those insights?
That's a fair question. I think to just see if the policy change was necessary is about just piloting. Let's just see what happens for the next month or 2 months before we even bring the policy. And so that's what May, June served before we actually brought it forward. And so in seeing those adjustments and seeing the streamline and seeing that, that's why we actually made it to the redlining to present. I think in terms of the compensation analysis, overtime aside, it is really about ensuring that our employees are being paid what they should be paid for the work that they're doing. So generally speaking, internally, the internal team performed that review, to the degree possible, and just comparison. When I say to the degree possible, it's in comparison to other districts our size, certainly neighboring spaces as well in terms of districts and systems, and then overall, just where do we need to improve and increase in terms from an equity stance for the work. The compensation analysis by a third party offers that lens that is just not internal, that can give us, sharper ways to turn the corner in specific directions.
That I shared with you is there a possibility that if we don't follow a process that we'll end up having employees who are working anyway and say, oh, you know what, I know this is what it takes at a school level to get the work done, and then we end up not paying them for work. And I don't expect an answer to that. That's an unknowable thing, but I think the policy getting ahead of the process is where that worry for me comes up.
I think not to answer directly in terms of knowing, but to be specific, in the policy it already stated that work done is work paid, and so we cannot withhold pay for work that is being performed.
I think it's you said we can't withhold work, but I think for me, I want to have an understanding if the air goes out, and I'm just going to make up Douglas High on Saturday morning, because it was hot there Friday, at 8 a.m., will we have to wait for, I'll just say, Michelle to get that okay, to get that to you? I just want to make sure that work doesn't stop. If an emergency occur, it says in here that if you work overtime and you fail to get it approved, could be grounds for termination. So I just want to make sure we are fair, because we understand with a district this size, things will always happen whether we plan for them or not. But I want to make sure that our employees of this district understand this is not something bad. We need to make sure they understand.
I was just going to my text messages from Michelle. I mean, it already, the toilet overflowed. I mean, those things we can't stop. That's just informing what's happening. The contractor broke something when they were fixing the roof. Like, those things happen. That's just accountability and understanding what's happening in the district as well, because additional decisions may also be made. So it's not just the overtime. There are additional information we may have to share with you all. We may have to shift some students. We may have to close a school. So additional issues can be connected to. It's not just the overtime. So the overtime process just streamlines the work. It does not stop the work.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Switching gears just a little bit, not specifically about the overtime, but contracts in general and disbursement of those funds. are we addressing that in policy in terms of the time frame in which, when contracts have been approved, when they actually are implemented? Because there seems to be some disconnect on this funding for various contracts and when they actually go into play. Does that make sense, what I'm trying to say here?
I think you might be asking two things, but certainly don't let me put words in your mouth. I'll speak to one because I just shared with the team again today, like who's responsible for when it's approved by the board, and board member Woods asked this maybe a month and a half ago or so, then who's responsible for ensuring that the implementation happens? The signature from the chair, the signature from myself, so that it actually moves forward into play. But then there's also the beginning part. How is it actually moving forward? Is it being stopped somewhere? This is not a blame or anything like that, but legal needs time to review every contract, and that's typically why they ask for the length of time that they ask for, sometimes 45 days, sometimes 60 days, and then sometimes when it's an emergency, we can escalate some things or accelerate some things and get them done faster. So there's that part of the process, actually moving it to bring it to the board for recommendation, and then there's the other side of it for implementation.
If I could just follow back up, and Madam Chair, is okay if I speak committee style, not wait for permission. It would be great point, and I think great response, Superintendent. But I think we have an opportunity, at least administratively, to codify that, and that way we can say, hey, here's a max number of days that sits with every department. Yeah. And board members need to see that clearly, and so we know that it's not a blame game. It's not on Tito's desk. It's not on Bailey's desk. It's the clock starts. It hits Bailey's desk day one. He has 45 days to execute. When I was working in city government, I had 48 hours for a signature to be signed and for it to be tracked through DocuSign, so a client knew when they could expect to have an executed contract. So colleagues, that's where you get to say, here's our expectations, give us a one-pager on what that process looks like, what's the business flow of that process. And but I think it's a great question, Board Member McKissick.
I have a couple of questions. We don't have all the policies for, yeah.
Approved. Well, 6014 was approved and 6016 was repealed. So you wouldn't have a copy of those. It was only those policies that
Purchasing agreement?
Purchasing authority. It should be in the packet of information. The first item would be your board staff communications.
I have a question about contracts. What is the actual number of contracts that have been expired? You're waiting on them, they're sitting on your desk or computer, and you inadvertently let them expire.
Will you clarify?
Every contract has the expiration date.
Correct.
You don't let them sit on your desk
Right.
past the expiration date in the computer or on your desk.
You're asking?
Yeah.
No.
So every contract is approved before the expiration date.
No, you have been brought contracts that have been after the expiration date before. Some have been brought before the expiration date. It depends on where they are in the process, which is, to Board Member Wood's point, codify the process so that we know where it is from day one to however many days we're sharing that a particular contract could move or take to move through the process.
The reason I ask that, because I have had principals call me and they have a contract in your office and they are waiting on it to be signed.
So it's not in my office. It could be in multiple offices, but I sign twice a day. Nothing sits in my office for a full day. So there's nothing in my office right now with the exception of one folder that I just saw on my way out, but there's nothing in my office. So I would have to know what that particular contract is, and then the team would be able to tell me where it is in the system.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Are we talking about, are we jumping from policy to policy, or do you guys want to finish conversation about specific policy? I have a question about communication, so I can hold, or we can go back and forth, however you guys want to do it.
For whatever staff that's having to track our redlining, they probably would prefer us to go one by one.
Okay.
So
No, that's fine. And while I have the mic, I want to acknowledge that Commissioner Edmund Ford and former Commissioner Eddie Jones are in the room. Thank you for joining us today.
Joyce, do you have anything?
I have a question on the professional service contracts, and I asked a lot of questions in the one-on-one space, and why the addition of all contracts. We had talked about school-level contracts and having individuals in the building who could enter into them. What is the total number of contracts that are under 25,000 that principals are entering into?
I'd have to get you that information.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there a process for, once those are signed, if they have that authority, for them to share it if you were not the final approver? Is that clear? If a principal is currently signing a contract, is there a step in our procurement process that says, now send a copy of the final contract to X, Y, and Z? Or are those staying at the school level?
Under a certain amount or just in
Under
general?
25,000, I would assume. There's a threshold for signature.
Will you restate your question a different way?
The main purpose behind this change for all contracts were mostly the school level contracts that were being entered into without a comprehensive way of understanding that they were happening, correct? Is that the initial intent of the policy change? make sure
To
the school-
insert all?
Yes.
Right. I think when we shared this, it was, yes, because principals entering contracts, and generally speaking, all contracts need the review of legal
Yep.
to ensure those binding clauses and the language that is in there. So it's less about me having to sign it and more about what's included in the contracts, yes.
No, that's understood. I think what I'm trying to get an understanding of is what is the scope, and will that delay services to schools? So if I raise $10,000 with my PTO to buy a new slide, and there's a contract with a vendor, am my children going to get that in July? And we've had, it already takes a long time to get 3 bids over a certain amount, and are we delaying the things that schools are purchasing, either with discretionary or budgeted dollars, when we've just said, contracts can take up to 45 days in the process?
No.
I would like to see the number of contracts and
Under 25,000.
that are not currently coming to legal for review. So,
Got it.
Yep. Thank you.
And again, just reminding board members that you are required to receive a copy of all contracts on a periodic basis, regardless of the dollar amount. If we start to forget that, it's okay to remind the administration. I know they're super busy, but you should be getting that regardless.
Piggybacking off of what Kevin Wood said, the board is responsible for implementing policies. You have 4 jobs, and this is part of your job. Anybody else on contracts?
I'm more interested on the policy review, Dr. Fagan, in reviewing the contract. When I appreciate you indicating that there's language around designee. Have you given at least thought to areas that you will assign that contract authority? I'm thinking about, for example, legal department. It was understood that designee obviously is the general counsel, having the authority to approve contracts up to the threshold of a board approval above $100,000. I'm sure there are certain departments on your senior leadership team that eventually we want to make sure that those departments have the bandwidth and the authority to be able to authorize contracts. Have you given thought to when you take that under your purview, do you plan to lend it back if the policy's passed to those division heads?
To enter the district into a contract?
The authority that they currently has as designee to enter into contracts. For example, professional. So again, if the policy passes, professional service contracts that previously could be entered into by those division heads will now only be owned by you or your designee. Do you plan to own it, or do you plan to exercise the ability to give that to a designee?
I think you're asking, do I plan to allow anyone else to enter the district into a contract? Am I misunderstanding?
Yes, based on the current policy which allows for it.
Mm-hmm. I currently sign the contracts under the current policy.
Yeah, so I guess, are they able to get it to the 1 yard line and then you just sign off on it? Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Yes.
So you won't say, hey, bring me those top 3 vendors and let me exercise the work as far as.
So I may ask when it comes to, especially after speaking at the conference with our business partners who named, hey, we're not getting the opportunities that we should have. So sometimes I may ask for those smaller dollars. Were there any other businesses that could have done this? Because we do this business or use this business a lot. So sometimes I do ask to keep us leveled in our selections and ensuring that we are allowing more opportunities to those who can satisfy the work.
Thank you.
Any more questions on contracts? Now we're going to go to overtime.
I'll ask a question regarding less of a question, more of a recommended adjustment to the policies, to the policy office. It sounds as if we want to at least give ourselves, the board primarily, some bandwidth in the event of emergency. Superintendent, you may be involved in that emergency where you can't get to a phone. I think I would recommend that the board approve language that at least has says, except for the case of emergencies, whereas the managers then have the ability to authorize overtime. I think it'll be a limited use of that requirement, but it at least empowers those employees that, again, we hire smart people that should know what is an emergency. And if it's 4:30 p.m. and the roof is leaking, I just would say that you should expect those individuals, and you may have examples where that's already happening, but the language gives me the cover that I trust you, but it doesn't say it in policy. So we have a simple opportunity as a board to include that language in the policy that says, in the event of emergency, the manager can still approve overtime without fear of, and again, the policy proposes language such as termination. I just think that we could give that level of flexibility. That's my recommendation, but if the board sees otherwise, so be it.
And to piggyback off of what Board Member Wood said, it said all overtime must be pre-approved by the employee's immediate supervisor. All cannot be pre-approved, because like what Board Member Wood said, if an emergency comes up, that can't be pre-approved. I mean,
Except for emergencies.
so it should say except in the case of emergencies or something to that nature, because again, the toilet overflowing, that can't be pre-approved because it's not predicted that Kevin gonna put toilet paper in there and overflow it on Friday for overtime.
I think that was already in the language, Maria, correct? The except for emergencies was a line in the previous, if I recall reading the policy, it already stated that.
Exception was in the rules and regulations.
So it's not in the policy?
Not in the policy, in the rules and
So-
regulations.
It needs to be.
And Maria, you recall very often, because the public, when they're querying policy, they don't see rules and regulations. So we often duplicate that language, and it's important that you remind particularly new administrators that opportunity, because it's hidden somewhere in administrative rules and regs, that we often carry forward that language in policy. Especially you got 4 new board members coming on board, they won't know where to go look for that. So it requires a little bit more typing, but I think it's helpful.
I have a question about safety and security. Let's just say hypothetically, a brawl breaks out at 2:35. You expect for these security officers to call their supervisor before they can break up a fight?
I think Board Member Love, we had this conversation, and that has never been the expectation. And as someone who has worked in the field for quite some time, had to approve overtime, had to assign overtime, had to pay overtime as well. I have a clear understanding of security officers and their role. Shared the same with them again this morning when I met with them at 6 a.m. It's very clear that everything is also not an emergency, right? And so for safety and security purposes, when something happens, the expectation is they meet the need of something happening.
I have another question.
Yes, ma'am.
Several principals called me this week, and they are very concerned that the officers clock out at 3 o'clock. My grandson gets out of school at 3:15. Who is going to manage my grandson's school and all the other schools?
Sure, we addressed that this morning as well when some of the officers raised that in terms of their supervisor sharing with them that they were supposed to leave early. I allowed them to handle that, get into the gaps to ensure that we have the coverage that we need, but no one is leaving school early. We leave when campuses are cleared, and that varies across schools.
Raleigh, Egypt, for example.
Yes.
The school is full of employees and students at 4 o'clock, at 6 o'clock most days. You approve the overtime for that? I don't want anyone to be fired for taking care of our teachers and staff and students. This policy is a little bit overboard, and we are trying to find a common ground for the policy revisions.
Madam Chair, I know we're reviewing policy.
I want the superintendent to speak.
So in terms of overboard, I'm listening to how we're getting to what's overboard. This process was already in place. I added the superintendent for additional oversight. If we want to remove superintendent, then we can remove the superintendent. But in terms of...
Finish.
It's okay.
But you have capable staff hired by you and evaluated by you to approve the overtime. I know you are the superintendent, but you have capable staff hired by you and evaluated by you. I just feel respectfully, you don't have to do everything. Respectfully.
Respectfully, I receive it, and I'm not doing everything, but I think that the onus of a leader is when they see an opportunity and a gap in practice, then that's where systems and processes, and in this case, policy come into play. Where we disagree is that my addition of the superintendent in terms of something that I have to speak to you about the expenses and the expenditures of a district Overtime is what we're speaking of right now, but overall and how that contributes to the funding and what we're able to do for our students as well, in addition to providing them the safety and the security that they need. I think that's a delicate balance. If the addition of the term superintendent is where we are, then that's not something that I would stand on the hill for. But I am sharing that based on the analysis and the insight I presented to the board, a big opportunity here in this particular area without taking away the opportunities that our staff need to do the work that they do.
So you would be fine with taking the superintendent off?
If that is what pleases the board, yes, ma'am.
Yes, it will please me.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So since we're on the topic of security, I do like to hear from Madam Superintendent an update on the incidents that happened over the weekend and the walkout from officers yesterday. We can talk about that when we finish talking about these policies, or we can talk about that now, however you prefer to do it.
In community engagement, I do have a presentation for safety and security.
Okay, but Madam Chair, where would that be on today's agenda?
It needs to be under. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Do I have the wrong one? Oh, got it. I'm sorry. Okay, got it. Then we can wait.
Mr. Williams, did you have a question? Yeah.
It is going to be impossible for the superintendent to micromanage this district. You just can't do it. It's too large, it's too big, it's too massive. There are some things that we will have that will require overtime year after year after year. I was just in awe when I saw the term stolen. We did not steal any overtime here. Those folk who worked were appointed and approved to work, so nothing was stolen. And that was a very strong term to put on employees, that they had stolen something from this district. That is not true, and I want the media to reflect that that was not true. Those people who worked during the summer months, I stayed in this system 52 years as a teacher. You have to have clean schools, you have to have things done before you come back to school. If you're going to fix the windows and the leaks and the water, that's going to be done, and it has to be done during those times. It has always been that way. So if they're going to work any overtime, it will be then, unless something disastrous happens again. But I do not want employees to be codified as thieves, because that is not true. That is untrue, and it should not have been said. So to that end, I think that those people who will be approving overtime should be responsible for it. The superintendent cannot be responsible for overtime. There are too many schools and too many employees to be that. I mean, your phone would never stop ringing. Things come up all the time. That would be a waste of our energy and time to put that in policy, because you have to hold the people you hired to do it to the standard of doing it. And if they don't approve it correctly, then you deal with them. But for you to approve the person fixing the wind and the water, it won't work. It will not work. It would be massive, and it would not get done. So my final say is that please do not refer to our employees as stealing anything. We're not in the stealing business. We're in the working business. And if it's done correctly, it is done correctly. And it is up to us to make sure that the policy is carried out correctly and not to impugn the integrity of the employees.
Madam Chair, staying on the overtime policy, last comment on that. For me, I know the team is taking notes to bring back to work session, but I am interested, Madam Superintendent, going back to the point that policy mentioned that the emergency language is in rules and regs, but it was also, as I reviewed the document, we did strike the language from the existing document. Is there a reason that we decided to strike the language? And again, and I know we have a new board member that's coming with a decade of policy experience, but I'm just thinking about the long hours we would spend in policy meetings. We would debate whether or not it should be shall or may, and or. We spend hours debating on the unintended consequences of policy language. So I tell my colleagues, particularly those that are going to still be here, it is challenging when you got bright lights, cameras, and you're talking about stuff that seems mundane, but has huge implications on the district. And that's the policy work. That's why it belongs to the board. That's why it's where we should spend most of our time. And most of our gotchas are going to often be found in a policy embedded that you simply hadn't looked at in a decade. So, but often, Maria, as you remember, we would ask the hard question, well, what's causing the change? What's the reason of taking that emergency language out of, because I cannot recall one time where we said, let's take it out of policy because it's in rules and regs. We often say, let's embed it in policy so it can be reflected there so the public can be well aware of it. So, and if we don't want to go deep on why we took it out, is there any objection to making sure that that's reflected? Or is there any problem with this language, particularly on the emergency language? And I'll read it out loud. It says, exceptions may be granted in situations deemed as emergencies. An employee who works overtime without prior supervisory approval may be subject to disciplinary actions up to termination. Why take that language out?
So the language was originally stricken for your consideration to align with the superintendent request to approve all overtime. Now, it's at the will of the board to add that exception language back into the policy, and I think the superintendent has already spoken to the fact that if the superintendent language is an issue, we can strike that, but whatever the board's will is.
Well, colleagues, unless there's objection right now, I would just like to let the strike through to be removed as you bring that back to work session for approval. Thank you.
If I may jump in there. So I like the aspect of striking the portion where, making it seem less punitive. And I think of, up to and including termination, because as we've all stated, overtime is necessary. But as far as, removing the superintendent from that role, being the ultimate leader of the district, that's something to consider as well. I mean, I would think that no one would have more authority as an employee than the superintendent, who's responsible for all of the employees. So I see what you're saying here, but at the same time, I see where that language could be, to me, I interpreted it slightly differently, where it's not making it punitive toward employees being fired if they do work overtime, because if it's ultimately approved, if the supervisor, who is the person doing the signing off by the superintendent, it's not like that employee is going to go run down the superintendent saying, sign my form. So just the checks and balances of the situation. So maybe we can continue to work on that language to strike that balance, but I just wouldn't want to usurp the authority of the superintendent.
Yeah, just so for the record, I didn't recommend the superintendent language be stricken. I only talked about the emergency language. I think that was Ms. Love who referenced the superintendent being removed from the process. I have no issue with the superintendent. Ultimately, we have our one employee, which is the superintendent. So if her language is, if her name is not there, she's still responsible. I simply just will often encourage the superintendent to utilize designee. I mean, you hire trusted people. You have people moving in town. That's more my take on it, is that superintendent and or her designee. Mm-hmm. So in the event that she's not available, there is someone who has the authority to act. We cannot paralyze the district in the absence of the superintendent. Correct. So I anticipate that action either be taken by a superintendent, by us knowing who those designees are, or that the board, in Ms. Love's point, the board will know that it has the power to appoint a designee.
So can you clarify the part that you wanted to make sure? I know you read it, but just what in that part, in those sentences there, that really stuck out to you as far
great
as...
point. So page 2 of 2, it just, and we've talked a lot about it just in the case of emergencies. Mm-hmm. Right now, if you strike that language, there is no emergency provision. So I just simply says remove the strike through, and it brings that language back to life, that in the event of an emergency, whoever can approve it. It ultimately, I don't have to, again, if the building's falling and if the building's on fire and the guys who's working, it's time to get off at 5, the point we're simply making is that they don't have to wait on someone says, hey, stay late to get that done.
So Dr. Fagans, what are your thoughts on this?
I think mainly she's referencing the emergency piece, just. if you're
Right,
talking-
the emergency, that.
I think when we
the
left
strike
out, that was my first question to Maria, why did we strike the emergencies piece? Because that was never the intention, because I understand emergencies happen and they will happen. Whether known or unknown, something's going to happen in a district this size, and the magnitude of the work that we do. The case in adding the superintendent for approval is exactly what you said, is checks and balances, and many of these reviews have led for some of these to be sent back, even after the direct supervisor has signed it. So it's not about micromanaging, but it is understanding where there's an opportunity and there's a gap. And so that was this. However, if it is removed and I have to speak to it, then I would just have to still speak to it, though.
Mr. Williams, is your light on again?
Yes. I want to be very, very clear.
Mike, please.
It is not possible for one person to rule over 8,000 and make decisions as to what can be done and what cannot be done. If this board doesn't have the confidence in the people who is doing the work, who are the leaders in those areas, then we don't have the confidence in the superintendent, because they are her employees. And to say that the superintendent has to give the approval of someone who's putting out a fire or who's cleaning up a flood is absolutely crazy, because it has to happen. And if you can't get in touch with, it doesn't happen, then it burns down or the building floods. There are people in place to do these things, and there always has been. But to give one person unfettered power is crazy. And we ought to rely on the system that we have. We don't have a savior here to come in here and tell folks when they can and when they cannot. These people clearly understand their roles, and they've upheld this district for the past 52 years, I know. So I don't think you need someone to come in and say what you can and cannot do when you know your job and you know what you're expected to do. And it minimizes those people who are in charge, because I wouldn't be in charge of someone who was over me, and then they're over someone else too. Then you don't need me. You just be over all of it and do it all yourself, and continue to use these kind of draconian words and cuts that we are seeing in the media now. I will not tolerate that, and I could not stand for it. Because I will not stand for employees being antagonized and counted as something that they are not. And that's what I see.
So perhaps, if I may, strike the happy medium here. The language, if it's put back in, the exceptions may be granted. Is it possible just to add the word superintendent or designee before any overtime hours are worked? The strike through at the beginning where it says prior approval for any overtime work shall be required, is that something that, as a board, we need to figure out? Do you want to keep that stricken from this policy? And then just simply basically the policy as it has been added with the all overtime must be approved by the employee's immediate supervisor at the direction of the division director or department head and superintendent or designee before any overtime hours are worked. I think that would suffice, and
I can get on board with that.
okay, get on board with that, and then we add back in the strike through portion. In the paragraph where it starts with prior approval, where that's stricken and you rephrased it and it says all overtime must be pre-approved by the employee's immediate supervisor at the direction of the division director or department head and superintendent, this is the new part, and superintendent, and we can add in parentheses or designee before any overtime hours are worked. And then to put the strike through, the exceptions part, put that back in. And I think that would maybe solve the concerns of the board. Does that make sense? Clear as mud? Okay, well, I'm sure, Mr. Bailey, we can work through it between now and the work session.
Except that who's doing the work, because I would just go home. I would not wait for that many bosses to tell me what I can and cannot do when I did it, but that's my job. I would not even ask. I would just go home and let it burn.
Superintendent, I want to know the actual number of overtime that was abused. I want to know the actual number and the dollar amount before next meeting.
Are you asking legal to do an investigation, an internal audit?
No, 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 no. You have the actual numbers.
Right, that I shared?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I want to know the actual numbers and a dollar amount for the past 2 months. You stated that you were doing the policy, you started doing the policy 2 months in advance. I want to know the actual number and the dollar amount that you reported.
Of overtime?
Yeah.
Actual number of I shared, are you looking for something different?
You shared with me and the whole board the total list of the overtime. I want to know the actual number and dollar amount for the past 2 months.
Right, it's in that same, it's monthly. It's by month and it's by department, and it has the amount. So would you just like for me to take out the last 2 months? Got it.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Maria Stewart, next policy.
So we've covered board staff communications.
No.
Okay, so purchasing authority, you've discussed. You've also discussed, I'm assuming that your discussion with the purchasing authority also addressed your concerns around the professional service contracts. And we've discussed overtime. So the only one that's left is board staff communications.
Yes.
You all want to discuss any concerns that you have around board staff communications and the proposed
Give us
revisions?
the revisions first.
Do you not have your packet of information? Do you? And this is the same policy that was presented, or the revisions to the policy that was presented during the board retreat, I think a couple of months ago, as well as at the committee meeting a couple of months ago. There are no real significant revisions to this policy except for the fact that the superintendent will provide documentation or information to the board on a weekly basis. That's one of the changes. I'm sorry. So if you look on page 2 of the document, you'll see that information requested by individual board members will be provided by the superintendent to all of the board members, as well as board members who wish to share information before the board relevant to district business will relay the information to the superintendent or the superintendent's designee or board chair. And then that information will be placed on the board agenda. So those are the significant changes to the policy.
What prompted the policy revisions?
I added that the superintendent will provide communication because I think the communication should be provided.
Not that.
Which piece?
The second one.
The piece about the board members who
Yeah.
wish.
Which piece?
The piece about the board members.
Board members who wish to share
Yeah.
information before the board relevant to district business or issues will relay the information to the superintendent or designee or board chair. Such information will be placed on the board agenda or, if appropriate, distributed to each member of the board in a weekly information packet.
That's just standard practice that wasn't stated in policy, that if you wanted to share something that it needs to go on the agenda. That's just standard practice. The piece about placing it to each board member, that just helps me ensure that whatever is shared between you and I, it is shared between or to all board members so that the communication is consistent.
Want to talk?
Yes, I do. I think we will inadvertently violate policy by spelling it out in this way. I think there are plenty of cases where maybe something doesn't get shared. If Board Member Coleman asks a question and I don't happen to get that answer, are we violating policy because I didn't see the response? And actually, we can add anything to the agenda at any time if there is a majority of board members who wish to do so. And we would be violating policy even if we had unanimous consent on something we wanted to add to the agenda based on the way this was written. I would recommend we strike both paragraphs from this under board communications to district staff.
I also have questions to Madam Superintendent. When you say that is the expectation for the full board and the superintendent to formally communicate, could you define what formal communication would be expected? Like, for example, I know I don't formally meet with you every week, and I do that on purpose because I feel that it is better for us to meet as a group, right, than meet one-on-one, because then I hear what my colleagues have to say. But what is your expectation, or what is the expectation on formally communicate one-on-one on a weekly basis?
That is sharing that it's your expectation that I communicate with you, with all members on a weekly basis. So if you'd like to strike that, that's just how that reads, that it is your expectation as a board that I, as superintendent, formally communicate. I just thought that was important, but certainly would understand if it wants to be removed.
No, I understood. I see what says. I had to meet with you on a weekly basis, and again, sometimes we meet a lot, but sometimes we don't. And as I said, I don't want to put everybody on a corner. And also, as the things that we said before, sometimes when you say formally, does that mean no one-on-one meeting?
No, it just means that we talk, we speak, we engage in conversation about clarifying questions that you have. There's no set time. I think we're overthinking this part, but certainly if it causes heartburn, like I would be okay with
heartburn. I was just
it.
asking. No, but I'm glad that that's why these meetings are important to talk about it. So moving on to the second one, I know it's not, I think when we first started talking about this policy, there was a change in tone on how board members can communicate with people on the staff. So on a regular basis, historically, we communicated with the CFO, we communicated with the general counsel. We don't always call the superintendent first. I call our constituent services office and ask them to help a constituent navigate things, talk to principals. I don't, it's important that board members do not exercise influence on staff, but certainly board members and staff should be able to talk to us, and we should be able to talk to them. It is my impression that an intended consequence of this policy is putting people on fear. I have had employees who have told me, I have been told that I cannot talk to you.
Well, I'm not sure where that comes from, but I didn't write that part of the policy. All official communications, requests for information, suggestions, and concerns will be communicated to district staff members through the superintendent. That was already written.
Have you instructed staff that if they hear from a board member, they have to notify you?
No, but I am aware that other members of the team have, and I've addressed that when a board member or board members have brought that up. I am aware of that particular communication being shared in that way.
All right, okay. That's all my questions. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Hold on. May I ask a question?
Althea first, then you, and then Kevin.
I'll let you go first, Ms. Coleman.
My question is, shall be the expectation of the board that the superintendent formally communicate with all board members, all members of the board on a weekly basis?
We can take it. Don't struggle with it.
Yeah, because sometimes our conversations are not where they should be, and I personally would like all communications to be between. It doesn't have to come from the chair and the vice chair. If the conversation should be open, where whatever you discuss with board member Love should be able to discuss it with me.
That's what the latter part of the policy, and I think someone just asked why I put it in there. That was the purpose, but I think board member Hewitt Garcia just shared that she would like for it to be struck or stricken. But that was the purpose of putting it in there.
I want to do away with one-on-ones. I'm just going to tell you the truth. Because One-on-ones are not serving the purpose that they were originally, from when I was started, were told one-on-ones would be for. Yeah, I don't bite my tongue when I have to say something. One-on-ones should be stricken from communications. If Board Member Hugh Garcia has a question, put it out there so all of us, we all may be thinking that same question or may have some thought around that question. Put it out there.
I'm available, whatever the board would like.
One-on-ones should be done away with, in my personal opinion.
Board Member Coleman, I agree with the spirit and agree with that process. I think my suggestion was we would violate policy if it was an actual just oversight, that if I left someone off of an email, I violated policy. Or I forgot to put one email that I had sent, I text Dr. Fagans a question and I didn't include it in board oversight. Are we violating policy? Like, it's the opportunity for us to be putting too detailed of a process. We set the expectations for our superintendent and how she communicates with us, whether it's in this policy or not. So that can still be the expectation. I just don't believe that it has to live in policy, but we are in 100% agreement that all of us need the same information at the same time as quickly as possible.
Madam Committee Chair, I know you're next, right? Yes. All right, because I just have a recommendation on this policy. More like tabling it. We have a new board coming on board in about 14 days. I think superintendent, incoming board chairs, vice chairs will be in retreat. I think our time is best spent on overtime and contracting, things that have immediate impact over the next 2.5 weeks. I don't think voting on a policy next week when there's an opportunity to set that cadence with your incoming board members, the existing board members, particularly on communications, I don't think my opinion matters as much. I think communication is good. I think communication is necessary. But as far as the redlining of this policy, I think I happily hand that to the next team.
I think that makes sense.
I agree.
Duly noted.
So my recommendation, Marie, is that we table this policy to the September board meeting. I think I see at least one incoming board member out there, but you can hand her a copy of the draft now, put it to work. Hey, how you doing, Ms. McKinney?
Anything else from policy?
I do. So as we continue to discuss, these policies, and it's so important that the board has. I mean, when I was in the election, people kept asking me, so what is the role of a board member? Governance is our most important function as board members. I want the board to consider the original intent of the General Counsel's office, and this is agnostic to this particular General Counsel and agnostic to the superintendent. Best practices will say that the General Counsel should report to the board. We still have one employee, which is the superintendent, but Tennessee law allows us to have our own legal counsel. And there have been times, multiple times this year that I had the opportunity to serve here, where that is almost like a conflict. And the independence of the General Counsel's office and the absolutely need of this board to have a General Counsel that they can go to and that reports to us, I think is important. It happens in other branches of government. Like you wouldn't anticipate in any other form of government to have the General Counsel, who is the conscience of the organization, to report to an employee. It should report to the legislative body. We can talk more about it. There's a precedent on Memphis City Schools, Legacy Memphis City Schools, when the office of the General Counsel was first established. It was instituted as a direct report to the Board of Education. So I want to open that for discussion. Happy to talk more about it. Hear your initial thoughts on that.
I agree. Policy is a board function, not the superintendent. And we need, no disrespect to Justin Bailey, we need our own general counsel.
Board Member Calvo, are you talking about bringing our general counsel now over to the board, or we getting our own, taking solicitations and getting our own general counsel? It's a little confusing what you said.
So the first one, so Madam Coleman, so it is the first one. So we'll be, the dotted line right now is, the general counsel reports on a direct line to the superintendent, and a dotted line, it serves the board. It should be the other way around. It will report to the board and provide services to the district. Of course, on a day-to-day basis, the general counsel has to deal with contracts, with injuries, with lawsuits, all of these things. But it should be a more independent. But to answer your question, it will be a direct line it will be bringing our general counsel office direct reporting to the board. And again, the history is that that's how it was set up in Memphis City Schools. It changed during the merger.
What's that? So yes, we had a history, and to give context, I think back even with retreats hosted by Tamika Hart had indicated and expressed her thoughts that this should be something that this body considers. So I served under both formats where the general counsel reported directly to the board. For full disclosure, I actually raised this to every superintendent candidate that if selected, I would likely push for this to be a change because I think one of my regrets that I don't think leave a legacy is where I knew that we were at times where we were in conflict. I understood the box that individual had to be in, of knowing that of who they worked for. And I look back at the uncomfortable questions that board members would often put general counsels in, and that awkward moment of having to answer that question. But they still served with a great deal of integrity, with the understanding that the superintendent is going to have to make that tough call, because I'm going to make decisions that sometimes is going to be more supportive of the board, and sometimes going to be more supportive of the administration. But I have to do what's in the best interest of the district. In many cases, you are rowing in the same direction as the board. Superintendent, we all want the same things, but when that's in conflict, we often are going to be raised with that question of who can ultimately fire the general counsel. And I don't know, I like being able to be fired by 5 as opposed to 1, but I understand that the board can make that call, but there are lots of nuances to it, and so I think if that's going to be a process that this body undertakes, somebody's going to have to lead it, and look forward to seeing. I'll be watching from afar.
All right, I have one last item that I wanted to bring, and this was the platform to bring it. I passed out to each of you a resolution amending the Shelby County Board of Education's.
Joyce had a question.
I let her skip.
Go ahead, we'll talk about it.
Can I just
You can jump back in. Go.
Before you bring your point, I just want to put a pin in Mr. Calvo's point. If that's going, unless you just raised it for a talking point, the next step would be a resolution to act in that in that manner, if that's something that you're looking for us to consider, and we can bring that up at work session. But if that is the will of the body, I didn't know if we just moved on, but I didn't know if we were done talking about that or not.
I mean, I appreciate all the commentary. I'd love to see what you had in mind if there was a resolution behind this, so we can consider it and have a formal, beyond the discussion we've had today.
Sure.
And
So I'm working on draft language for this resolution. I'll plan to bring it up for discussion during the work session.
Again, there's a young lady by the name of Natalie McKinney that may also be available to help draft that language as well.
All right, we'll be calling her.
Go ahead.
So a resolution amending the Shelby County Board of Education's fiscal year 2024-2025 amended budget for August of 2024. Thank you, County Commissioner Edmund Ford, for joining us today. Past Commissioner and a good friend, our brother Eddie Jones, I didn't recognize him back there, and Joseph Kyles. Thank you all, Whitehaven, just for your support, and just know that we are committed to doing what we said we would do. I brought this to the board for you to take, for you to look at it. you have any questions, any concerns, that you would bring them back to me so that I could have this available. I would say no later than Monday, Soup. Have it no later than Monday, because we're trying to have a special call after work session on next Tuesday. And do I need to read it to you, or would you like to take it home and read over it?
Read it.
Read it. All right, whereas TCA 49-2-301, W provides that the budget shall set forth in itemized form the amount necessary to operate the schools for the scholastic year beginning on July 1st, following on or on such a date as provided for by the charter or private legislative act, and that any changes in the expenditures of money as provided for the budget shall be ratified by the local board and appropriate local legislative bodies. And whereas it is necessary to amend the fiscal year 2024-2025 general fund budget and appropriate said funds as reflected in item 1. Now therefore be it resolved that the Shelby County Board of Education hereby approves the fiscal year 2024-2025 amended budget and appropriate said funds as follows. Number 1, that the general funds will increase by $1 million at the Memphis-Shelby County Board of Education's direction to fund the Whitehaven STEM building with the planned use fund balance. $1 million closes that funding gap of construction costs of the storm shelter, which we know was something that came along a little later, and that was after we had the original cost. B, the $1.3 million, which was already allocated in the Mscs capital budget and funded by previous administrations through the county's capital bonded funds. This has also been approved by both the Shelby County Commissioner and the Board of Education. C, both allocations, $1 million planned use of fund balance and the $1.3 million of the county's capital fund is a total of $2.3 million. MSCS will pay that, and Superintendent will correct me, directly to School Seed. But School Seed will receive payments of the $1 million immediately from us. It will provide records of all payments made to contractors and receipts upon request by MSCS for audit purposes from funds used with the planned use of the fund balance. MSCS will pay the $1.3 million funded by the Shelby County Commissioner through bond proceeds to School Seed when receipts, did I get that right, Eddie Jones? When receipts are received. All right, and so I think the problem is that School Seed needed to be able to pay that money, correct, Mr. Jones, without us having to go through one of those steps. Come on, help me out.
No. So if the district go ahead and submit that money, all of it, to School Seed, the stipulation should be that School Seed, for the first $1.3 million of the bond allocated money, should be given back to the district so that it can submit it to the county commission to be reimbursed the 1.3. That's where the difference on what you're reading and what I'm hearing.
Okay.
So all of it should go to them. The first 1.3 million spent on that building comes back to the district so that the district can submit it to the county commission and get reimbursed the 1.3, and it's done.
Yes, sir, with receipts
Yeah.
for reimbursement for the Shelby County Commissioner. All right, yes, ma'am.
You know,
So I want to clear up something. So the $1.3 million we have sitting in a fiscal year
Yes.
FY22 appropriation.
Yes.
It's sitting there right now. Right now, as a resolution is written by the county commission, we cannot reallocate that $1.3 million to anything except for the Whitehaven STEM building.
Yeah.
We cannot send out cash from the district of that $1.3 million without having receipts today.
Yes.
To be able to do, because if we send the cash out today, we no longer are going to be gaining interest on that cash.
yeah.
So it's my recommendation that again, we, by resolution, they can go ahead and start building the STEM building by this resolution or whatever amendment that we do. They can go ahead and start. There's no expenditures related to the building. Have they broken ground yet?
No. They've not broken ground.
So are there any expenditures yet?
None.
So we can't send out any money if there's no expenditures related to the building. So again, when there are expenditures, then we can then pay out the expenditures starting first with the $1.3 million. Then we can submit those invoices when we send our cash out the door to the county to repay for the $1.3 million. My second ask is $1 million is asked of our planned use of fund balance. Is there any kind of receipting or accuracy related to how much the storm shelter will cost? I remember seeing something like $692,000. I wouldn't want to commit all $1 million if the storm shelter is only $692,000. My second ask, since you guys gave me the mic, is there still a requirement related to if a storm shelter is needed? Because I understood that that was lifted as well. So those are a few questions that I have. So I apologize, I talked out of turn.
I can answer that latter part of that. It is required. It's in the IBC building code. You know, I got about 16 years in code enforcement background. It's required. It's in the IBC 2021 code, building code. I've had a conversation with John Zena, and with all of that. Oh, so Commissioner Ford, then let me put these glasses on. All right, so, and they got a cost for all of that now for the storm shelter. Compared to what you've seen, it's $1,041,243. The longer that you wait, the more that the cost keeps going up. But I want to go back to, if you guys were building the building and you had to give money back to the commission, would you not spend that money out of your fund balance already to get those receipts to send back to them? Because you couldn't spend the money from the commission because they didn't give it to you. So that's my question on your explanation of how you presented it. But if you were building a building, you would spend that money out of your fund balance to get the receipts. Is that correct?
If we were building a building, the contractor would submit us a payout of services that they've rendered. We pay our cash to it, and we do it like that. So again, I asked the question, are there any expenses right now, and have you broken ground? If you haven't broken ground or there's no expenditures, it wouldn't make sense for us to pay out or send any expenditures out the door. And the reason being is that you don't want to release any funds because you want to hold on to as much of your cash as possible because you're gaining interest on it. So the county does it the same way. It's the reason why they don't give us the money up front, because they want to gain the interest of their cash. Cash is king. So again, when we see expenditures, there's no problem. This resolution would say we'll send the money out the door when expenses are made, and then we'll send cash out the door, and we'll immediately ask for the reimbursement for the county on the first $1.3 million. Now, the extra $1 million to pay for the storm shelter, if the board chooses to do so, if we want to donate funds on behalf of that, which, again, I wouldn't recommend. I would still do an expense for the storm shelter if it was. For my expertise, I would do expenses from the board instead of making a donation to any other entity since it's us. That's my recommendation.
So,
you still get the same thing. You still get the building built. It's just a different way that you use your cash.
Well, I think the biggest problem is with the builders and the commitment. They want to make sure that all of that is up front. So let me give you a little background on my experience. Now, in the past, you never got money from the commission up front. Not until I passed a resolution to make sure that you all got 85% of that money up front. That's part of FY22. You could have been and did what you needed to do with that, but y'all used it for other things in the district. Don't have a problem with that. So, for your FY22. So you get that 85% is divided up over 12 months, and it's given to you in advance, and you have to turn in receipts for it. That's correct. So I don't see where there's any difference in that maybe on you all's end, but the commission gives you bond money up front. They, on that 85%, you don't get it monthly. That's not what the finance director tells us how that is distributed.
No, sir, that hadn't happened since fiscal year, I'm sorry.
The reason
I know, we got to stay in this meeting now.
And just so we, in all due respect, Mr. Jones, just so we can stay on task, we'll be debating all day on how the process works. I mean, we're still trying to figure it out, right? So I think ultimately you're before a body that's trying to figure a way to support your end game, which is to build this building. I do call into question, you have a builder that wants all funding up front before they're willing to pull out a shovel. One thing you can start with is probably a different builder.
They don't have it, so.
But if it's $1 million short, where's the other money? You don't have to answer that now, but it's in somebody's bank account drawing about 5 to 6%. Probably, if you wait another 6 months, enough to close your gap. So, but this body wants to help. So, as opposed to looking at the dynamics of, where and when. Could you set up a process if the board wanted to allocate $2 million to this project? You guys break ground, and then we reimburse potentially for your first set of expenses. An idea came from Ms. Garcia, but we can help that way as opposed to debating on is it the storm shelter, if it's the last dollar, first dollar. We showed early on both personal finances as well as board finances in support of this project. So there's no question. We've seen all the media coverage. We're in full support of this project. But this is the first of me hearing that a builder refused to get started. I'll take your first $8 million. You may not get a roof, but I'm going to start the work.
Exactly, and I get your point. But when this process started in the raising of these funds, and the one thing that was made known to us, they want until all of that money is committed. Now, if you all can ensure that this money is committed until the time that they can get those receipts, they'll start building.
But Mr. Jones, if we make, this body will make a commitment that we will pay the money, right?
Yeah, and again, that way we don't have to allocate funding for a project that may not get off the ground. I want to be clear, whether it happens in August or the new board, you shouldn't cut a dollar until there's dirt moving. Because these limited resources should be reimbursed to a project that you know is actually going to get completed.
Right, and so and looking at this resolution, to that point, the 1.3 is bond money. And there's a certain way that you have to flow with that. And I get that part. But the 1 million, y'all are using that, so you want to use that same process for that as well? Because that's just plain use of fund balance. That's not bond money, and the commission is not going to receipt y'all that money back because that wasn't approved by them.
I agree. All I'm saying is it's still cash. So again, to Board Member Woods' point, that's why I asked the question, was there any expenses or has ground broken? When there is, like to your point, the first $1 million of expenses that come in for payouts, if the board chooses to do, when we see their payout, we can send $1 million out the door then. And then same for the $1.3 million. All I'm saying is that it wouldn't be financially feasible if we sent $1 million of a donation out the door right now without any expenditures or receipts. And this commitment, this is a commitment that says that it'll be done.
Then I'm good with it because all they need is the commitment. So if you want that, and we will make sure that the 1.3, you'll get the receipts for that, and make sure that, so for auditing purposes, you'll get the 1 million receipts for the auditing purposes, okay? For the whole 2.3. If that will fix the equation. Long as it's committed, they ready to break ground next week.
So we are committed. So I think we have resolved that. Commissioner Ford?
No.
So we,
Just,
all right, we
Chair.
good. Yes, ma'am. I got it.
we're not doing,
That is the end of policy committee.
Just bring it up on next, the work session.
We can bring it
Can't
back
vote on
up
anything today.
in work session. Yeah, yeah.
The 1.3 already exists. We'll add the commitment of the $1 million as the allocation. I will place that in writing as a commitment. I think what we have been having a discussion about is the process of accounting for the funds and ensuring that it is on a reimbursable basis based on receipts, invoices, and of that nature. So no funds will go out to anyone without an understanding of what these funds are going to, as we do with all of our business.
And
Is that
Superintendent,
clear?
I just want to say, just for the record, that never was there at any moment that this board, this body was not going to support Whitehaven High School and the STEM building. We have been in support of that since day one. So make that very clear to any and everyone listening and watching that that is always the case. And it's like anytime you're dealing with significant funds like this, everyone wants us to be fiscally responsible. This is what we have to do. And so thank you to my colleagues for ensuring that we were doing our due diligence as a governing body to ensure that we were not only being very responsible with this money and supporting the students of Memphis-Shelby County Schools. Thank you.
To that point, Ms. McKissick, do we need to pass anything, or is it, because for you to write an email for an extra $1 million, or that commitment is already
She said she's going to bring it to the board meeting. This is just committee meeting, guys. We just get to pontificate today.
Yeah.
There's no action. So she knows what our expectations are. I'm
And
confident.
include
Yes.
all of us
It'll
on
be in
the
the bu-
email.
2 weeks to figure it out.
It'll be an email, but it also has to be, in the budget
All of us on
amendment
the
will
email.
take care of it for the work session. Everyone will see it be official.
Include all of us on the email. Include all of the board members on the email, so we know that you sent it.
Board member Love, I always include, why are you sharing this like I don't? I will include all board members 3 times. Yes, ma'am.
What's next?
Academics. You gonna hear from Taylor first? Yes, ma'am.
Community engagement. She is here. Yeah. Community engagement meeting. We are now, keep community engagement meeting. Roll call, please. We don't have to do roll call. Yeah. Director of Health Department, you're up next. I asked for the Director of the Health Department, Michelle Taylor, to give us a snapshot of what's going on in our city and how she can be a community partner with us and the city.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Good to be with you, Superintendent Fagans. Very honored to be here to present to you all today. I'm going to run through a couple of slides, and I will try to leave plenty of time for questions. Once again, appreciate this opportunity to share this information with you. Today, I want to go over some of the sexual health data and statistics that we currently know about in Shelby County. I'm sure you've been hearing some of the things that have been going on with particularly HIV and STIs in our community, and I wanted to give the board a fuller picture of what we're dealing with, particularly in kids 15 to 19. Next slide. So first, I always like to start with a slide to talk a little bit about myself, because I think it matters, especially when adults get in a room and talk about things that may be sensitive. I like to remind people what it was like to be the age of the children that we're about to talk about. So the two pictures that you see on the left are a 17-year-old Michelle Morgan, recently graduated from White Station High School in 1993. Yes, I'm going to tell my age, right? And those are pictures of my parents and my younger brother moving me into my freshman dorm at Howard University. And you'll notice in those pictures, they're smiling, but I'm not really smiling, right? Because I am afraid. I'm afraid about what's about to happen at school. I'm afraid about whether I'm going to be successful. I'm afraid about who I'm going to make friends with. I'm a long way from home, and I know DC, but I don't know DC, right? But what I can tell you is, even through that fear, I was able to overcome that clearly because I was armed with information when I went to school. All right. I also like to joke that this was probably the last time I wore belts during that year, before the freshman 15 and life. But I think it's important to level set. The other side shows me with some of my line sisters when we were graduating from Howard University. And then the bottom right picture is 5 generations of women on my mother's side of the family. And I also like to do this picture and show this picture because my father had the presence of mind to put us all on a couch when my mom graduated from Memphis State University in 1979. And she also was a product of Legacy Memphis City Schools, Fairleigh High School. And I want you to look at the lady, the second from the left. That's Hattie Ray Britton, my great-grandmother. She's next to her mother, Lula Cole, my great-great-grandmother, who did not pass until I was a senior in high school. And what I will tell you about Hattie Ray, and I won't make people raise their hands like I normally do, is that when I hear adults fussing about what kids should or shouldn't be doing, especially in the arena of sexual health, I ask them, do they know about normal human development? And then I ask them, especially in the South, what does it look like do any of you all know how old your grandmother or your great-grandmother was when she had her first child? You don't have to yell it out. You don't even have to raise your hand, right? My great-grandmother, Hattie Ray, was 14. My grandmother, Freddie, in the middle, jazzy as she always was 18, right? And my mom was 20 when she had me. I broke the mold, and I was an old lady. I had my first at 30, right? But typically, especially for that baby boomer generation and before that, they were having their first children in their teen years, particularly in the South. So that is what I want you all to think about as we go through this presentation. Normal human development, making sure our children are educated fully on their bodies and normal human development, and what it looks like for us really to be in an era where people aren't different, but maybe culture is a bit different. Next slide. So next slide, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we mean by a transitional grant area. So everybody knows we live in a tri-state area, but what a lot of you all don't know is that the Shelby County Health Department's Ryan White program that is responsible for caring for people who are already living with HIV is responsible not only for the people living with HIV in Shelby County, but we're also responsible for Tipton and Fayette County. We're also responsible for 4 counties in northern Mississippi and 1 county in eastern Arkansas. And you can see those represented. And that total population for that transitional grant area represents a little bit over 1.3 million people. Now, why is this important? Next slide. This is important because these are the representations of those counties and how many people are living with HIV in those counties. And as you can see, and I'm going to see if this pointer works, maybe, maybe not. Not. All right. So as you can see, Shelby County has the most people living with HIV, little over 7,000, for a total in that total transitional grant area of a little over 8,000, right? And we are pulling and taking care of people in those other counties too, and we are federally funded to do so. Next slide. Now this is the one that usually gets people clutching their pearls, but I'm going to try to be gentle with you all. But this is serious business. So the reason why the Shelby County Health Department has really been raising the alarm since May of this year is because Shelby County is number 2 in the nation for new HIV infections. I'm going to repeat that, and I'm going to say it slower. We are number 2 in the nation for new HIV infections. If you can see the chart, my old eyes can't see all of that, but I know what's on it, right? Number 1 is Miami. Number 3, not number 2, we're number 2. Number 3 is Atlanta. And as you can imagine, what this chart is showing you in point is that even though we have a smaller population than those 2 large cities that are on either side of us on this bar graph, the rate of new HIV infections is much higher, meaning it is spreading much faster here in Shelby County. Next slide. Now, the bar on the left shows you the total population and the percentages by race of the transitional grant area I just showed you, right? So it's not just Memphis and Shelby County, it's also those folks in Mississippi, in Fayette and Tipton in West Tennessee, and in Crittenden in East Arkansas, all right? And of that population of about 1.3 million people, 47% are African American. Here's the other concerning statistic. Of those 47% of African Americans in that transitional grant area, 75+% of those folks are African American that are living with HIV. So that means that the majority of the people living with HIV in our transitional grant area are African American. So I want you to take note of that, all right? And I said 75, I meant 72.9%, all right? Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about the trends in our TGA. Next slide. Now, this is by age group. This slide shows of the people living with HIV/AIDS, what proportion are of each age group. The proportion by age groups have remained relatively stable. The proportion of those in 25 to 34 age group have remained high compared to other age groups, falling around 34% throughout the 5-year trend, and this is showing you 5 years. The proportion in the 15 to 24 age group increased slightly in 2022 and 2023, from 28% to 29%. Next slide. And then, when you look at adolescents, this is very important. That 15 to 19-year-old age group is what we're really concerned about. These are 2022 data, and what you can see here, and it's circled, is that the 15 to 24 age group had a more than 5 times higher rate compared to those among the same age group in the U.S. overall. So the red bar is our TGA, Memphis TGA. The blue bar is US overall. And unfortunately, what you're seeing across age groups is that we are much higher than the US average for every single age group. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about HIV co-infections. What does that mean? Co-infection is a medical term, next slide, meaning that you have 2 or more infections in your body at the same time, okay? So on this chart, what you're seeing is a couple of things. Co-infection often occurs with HIV, particularly here in Shelby County. In Shelby County, the most common co-infection with HIV is syphilis, and this is true across all stages. Of the 1,272 syphilis cases in 2023, 19% were also infected with HIV. Of the 3,347 gonorrhea cases, 4% were also infected with HIV. And 1% of the 9,455 chlamydia cases were also infected with HIV. So what does that mean? If one of our children, one of our adolescents, or even one of our young adults who are graduating at high proportions out of our Memphis-Shelby County schools has chlamydia, gonorrhea, syphilis, then chances are they may have been exposed to somebody with HIV, even though they may not be positive, but it means they are at higher risk. Next slide. And what this shows is the HIV incidence among 15 to 19-year-olds in Shelby County between 2018 and 2023. So you're seeing a 6-year trend here. And don't be encouraged by that drop in 2020. What we think that is COVID, right? And that's an underreporting because people weren't getting tested as much during that year. After that, you see we have risen well above 2018 levels, all right? And what that looks like in percentages, syphilis rates among, or actually HIV rates. So this is over the past 6 years. And we've seen a 50% increase at least. And a lot of this is because we are now testing more and we're finding more people who actually are positive for HIV and more adolescents. Next slide. And then when you look at syphilis rates, that's even worse. Syphilis rates among 15 to 19-year-olds have increased 267% in Shelby County over the last 6 years. This is almost double the increase in this age group seen statewide for 15 to 19-year-olds over 6 years. So we increased 267%. Statewide, the increase was 166%. So there are increases statewide, but nowhere near what we've seen. Next slide. So what does this look like, especially for our folks living with HIV? Next slide. So a couple of things. Since you all first heard the press release, and I know a lot of you all heard it, read it, saw it on the news, we have had unprecedented support from the Tennessee Department of Health and the CDC, and we have asked for people on the ground to help with disease investigation, to help beef up our staffing numbers, and we have increased funding to have additional staff to get out there and get through these rates and figure out how we can reduce them. Next slide. We have also started a Know Your Status campaign, which is an old campaign, but it still works. And the reason why this is so important is because, as you can see, we have a lot of data. We know the top 10 zip codes where the highest HIV rates are, and you see those listed on the screen. We also know that we've had an astronomical increase in the number of 15 to 19-year-olds dealing with this issue. So if you've seen our billboards around town, if you've seen us talking about hot summer and prepping yourself, all of that is to let people know that HIV is not the death sentence it was when you saw me in the picture at 17, all right? It's not the death sentence it was 30 years ago. We have a lot of tools in our toolkit to be able to fight this. But the first step in fighting it is to actually do more testing, to know what the true universe of HIV is in the county. And then the next step is to make sure we are doing comprehensive sex education at age-appropriate levels with our kids so that they know how to protect themselves in the best ways. How many of you all know that there is a medicine called PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis, that you can take once a day, and if you are having unprotected sex and you're taking that medicine once a day, it reduces your chances of getting HIV should you be exposed. That exists. PEP, post-exposure prophylaxis. You take that within 72 hours of having unprotected sex, it reduces your chances of getting HIV if you've been exposed. And then for those who happen to be positive for HIV, the medicines are much better, even from 10 years ago. You can take one pill a day. In some cases, people are able to take one shot a month and be able to live long, fruitful lives with HIV. And for years, we have known that HIV positive pregnant mothers, if they are treated throughout their pregnancy, cannot transmit to their unborn children. We've known that for a long time. So all of this is possible, and all of this tells us that we need to do a better job of educating our children so that they know how to protect their health, and if they haven't been able to protect their health up to this point, how they need to get linked to care. Next slide. Just to put it in perspective, right now, the health departments, and this is just health departments in West Tennessee, so this is us, Fayette, and Tipton. Majority of the tests we did, right? So you see how many thousands of HIV tests we did in 2023. And we had a positivity rate of about 3.2%. All right? Community-based organizations followed that, not as many tests. And because it's not many tests, you're not seeing as high of a positivity rate, right? The more you test, the more you know. And then our hospitals, they're last in this number count, but we're working with them as well to come up with solutions for how they could be testing more so that we can really capture who needs to get linked to care. Next slide. And this I wanted to show you is just the HIV care continuum, right? And what that shows you is that a person living with HIV goes through this care continuum, and if they follow it, they can be what we call virally suppressed, all right? And that's what you want to get to. So these are the steps. Engaging positive persons in care and retaining them in treatment helps them to achieve viral suppression. Next slide. So a person living with HIV who is on antiviral treatment and has an undetectable viral load cannot transmit HIV through sex. Let me say that again. If you are undetectable, you are untransmissible. You equals you. And that is really the goal. That's why you test. That's why you figure out who's positive. You get them linked to care. They become undetectable, and they become untransmissible and untransmittable. Can't talk today.
Michelle,
Yes.
what do you need from us? The
That's on
state
next-
law precludes testing in schools, and we can't require parents to go get tested in children. What do you need from us to become a better partner with the school system?
Commissioner Love, I'm glad you asked me that. Next slide. So, these are the 3 laws that I know you all are dealing with. All right? One is a 12-year-old law, the Gateway Law, saying that it's abstinence-only education in schools, and if it's not abstinence-only, that's a problem, right? And then recently, a Family Rights and Responsibilities Act was passed that really put a cold blanket on a lot of efforts across the state around treatment of minors without parental consent, right? But what I will tell you, Commissioner Love, and I'm so glad you asked the question, is that you all also have, and I know you all know this, a Tennessee Health Education Standards, right? It's published, and actually you all standards are published for 2024, and the new standards are published for the 25-26 school year. And within those standards, it says things like, recognize abstinence from all sexual activity as a positive choice. But the next standard right under that says, identify preventative methods and potential outcomes of engaging in sexual behaviors, pregnancy, abstinence, adoption, hepatitis B, STIs. And it says, compare various contraceptive methods in accordance with state and district policy. So what does that tell me? That tells me that you have a coordinated school health program that, according to your Tennessee Lifetime Wellness Standards, you can teach some of these things, unless the standards are wrong. Next slide. So what I'm proposing is a list of possible partnerships, okay? And I'm gonna list them for you. There's several things, you have several options, several things that you all can do based on what the board and the superintendent feels comfortable with. We have legal, we understand. You all have legal, your legal department has to feel comfortable with what you're doing. But what I would hold up is that we have precedent at the Shelby County Health Department of obtaining parental consent for all kinds of things we do with you all. We do back to school shots with you all every single year, sometimes multiple events. Guess what's required? Parental consent. So you ask what we need for you all to partner with us so that we can best support you in getting that parental consent, following all state and local laws, and making sure we teach our children how to protect themselves and we give them the tools to do so. So some of the options. We could.
This is what I'm proposing.
Yes, ma'am.
You're going to work with the superintendent and the general counsel, and they are going to bring us back a recommendation in 30 days? Yeah, 30 days?
I think we talked, is that too soon? I think we said about 2 months, but.
What I would say is this. I wanted to read those options to you, and then you all can decide what a timeline looks like. Some things can start immediately. Some things we would need 2 weeks to a month to stand up. Yeah. So we can train your nursing staff, right? We can help you distribute rapid HIV test kits. We can co-locate in some of your schools with a coordinated school program. We can beef up the after-school public health programs you already have in some of your high schools through University of Memphis. We could also form a 2 to 3 month task force reporting back with a defined date to discuss progress and implementation. We could even do limited at-home immunization and testing, but it would have to be limited to those kids who are hard to reach. And we have already drafted an MOU, which is sitting in the superintendent's and Chairwoman Green's box, and we will share it with the rest of the board, saying how we could stand these things up. This would be no cost to Memphis-Shelby County Schools, but these are all options to get us started on the road to better protecting our children.
I like all of those options, but I'm going to defer to Superintendent Marie Fagans and Justin Bailey to provide an update a month.
Yes, ma'am. I'll give you a timeline.
Yeah. This is a serious matter, and we want to do it based on policies and laws.
Absolutely.
Thank you for taking the time to come down here. I personally learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor.
Thank you. And just one quick follow. Have you been on the 88.5 station with Mr. Best previously?
I've been on there previously to talk about COVID.
Yeah, that's been a while. That's been a while.
Yes.
Those numbers are down. These numbers are up. So we need to have you back.
Okay.
All right,
absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah.
John has his antennas up, so we look forward to you being on 88.5, helping us to make sure we're keeping the community and parents updated and informed. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you all.
Chair Love, can we table 202 community schools for work session? The next item on today's engagement agenda, community schools. Can we table that for next meeting?
I don't have community schools on my agenda.
On the updated one. So we can move.
Yes.
Thank you.
Safety and security. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so for safety and security, we were able to meet with officers initially, but spent much of the day yesterday with Director Riley. I think I see him in the room. Director Riley, are you still in here? He probably doesn't want to be seen. There he is. Director Riley and our new Executive Director of Safety and Security, George Harris, is in the front here. Both spent time yesterday really talking through what our officers not just wanted, but what we need. So certainly we spent time looking at money. We spent time and thinking about what safety has to look like for the district, and then certainly what those needs are. And I've shared much of this with the board in terms of our needs and our gaps. I've shared, the desire to have an officer at every building that has at least 150 or more students, and then what that particular gap is. Yesterday's agreement, certainly we enhanced the salary and we provided that to you. So certainly our officers now start at $25 an hour as opposed to the 23. We have decreased the number of steps from 9 to 5. So they get to their top step, if you will, much faster, which is $30. Did keep the $1,000 incentive, regardless if the state honors the COLA, the cost of living, or not. We also considered how we would feel the need in terms of the number of vacancies. And so we have 125 total right now, and I think 12 vacancies in terms of officers. 7? Okay, 7. 7, and then are there still 7 in the academy though? So hopefully they all finish, and then those are filled. But in terms of the need itself, in order to meet the need of having at least one officer every building that has 150 or more students, we are at about 64 more officers that we need. That places us at about $6.3 million, I believe, in terms of a funding gap. Additional $4 million that we would need to sustain that over the next few years. And so I've shared, in some background conversations about what that advocacy would probably need to look like for us. But overall, in terms of overtime, I shared earlier that I addressed that with them, that overtime is understood, shared it with Director Riley. He heard me share it with officers, so they understood as well. In terms of the Jamboree, that has already been staffed properly. So overall...
What do you mean staffed?
In terms of the number of officers that are needed at the Jamboree?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the directors, the sergeants, they take care of the staffing and determining just based on, expected population or attendees at the game. I think in this term, though, considering what happened last year, as I've learned historically what took place, just kind of beefing that up, I'll let Director Riley speak to it just so you have clearer understanding of what's taken place.
Please.
So good evening. As far as the jamborees were concerned, there were overtime scheduled to do those jamborees. We did meet with MSCIAA to devise a plan for those 6 jamborees that occur on Thursday and the 5 that occur on Friday. And we have fully staffed those jamborees to ensure the safety. We have also coordinated with our partners with Memphis Police Department and Shelby County, who would also provide support for those events.
I want to know the number of officers this year and last year for the jamborees.
May I interrupt for a second? I think Madam Chair, so I think the specifics of those things is important that we take advantage of the Tennessee code that allows us to speak on a closed session for specific safety measurements. And if it's the will of the board, we could all just go into a conference room and talk about the specifics about how that's going to be staffed. I am concerned about that too, but I think it will be important to not share specific numbers of how many officers are at a particular event in public, if it's the will of the board. I do want to commend, Madam Superintendent, your rapid response to address the salary issue. And I have expressed, concerns as Commissioner Love about the events, but it is my recommendation that we talk about this behind closed doors. But it's up to the will of the board.
It isn't my will, because I receive phone calls about this monthly. And I was at the Jamboree in Cordova when the shooting happened. General Counsel, yeah.
Okay.
If you stop me,
Yeah, that's how it works.
if I am invading into a private meeting,
Thank you, Board Member Love. I certainly will. I think it's okay to talk generally about numbers. I just would caution about things like positioning and strategy and detailed security plans. I think that would be better suited for a closed meeting.
I know the general public doesn't need to know about strategies and operation. But I would like to know, last year versus this year, how many SROs officers are going to be at our Jamboree?
And just to further illuminate what Board Member Love, is just to try to ensure the public that there is something different and increased from last year to ensure their safety. And so, just like safety in general, like, are there more officers?
And if you don't know, say we don't know. This is not a time to stand strong. Just give us the answer. We don't know, get back to us. Is it more than last year? And if you can share the exact number. We know it can't be more than the complement, which that was printed in the paper today. So how many are going to be covering the
It can be more than when? What, sir?
How many are going to be there this weekend, and the variance between that number and last year's coverage?
I cannot give you what that exact number is compared to last year.
Can the gentleman behind you do that?
No, sir.
Because why? Because he doesn't know it?
Not off the top of his
He
head, sir.
was here.
But I can get that information to you, and
Okay,
we
yeah,
will
that's
share it
perfect.
with you
Okay.
in an email.
Yeah. Totally understand. And you're not supposed to come prepared for those answers. Just curious if we can get that information. What?
They all have computers.
Let them give them time to get it to you. Yeah, that's fine.
Board Member Love, I'll make sure we get that right before we leave.
They all have computers.
I mean, is the will of the board to still go on a closed session to talk about some of these things?
I don't think I need to step into a closed session at this point since they don't have the information. So if they can get back with us on that information, and we've got time between now and certainly Friday, but
We'll take
I
care
have
of
no
it.
desire to step
We'll just
out.
make sure that we get you the accurate number.
Can we start Thursday?
And I think it's just important while we have every camera in our face and in our mouth to once again assure parents that students will be safe, parents will be safe, and we have everything worked out for the Jamboree. Even if we don't give a number, I think just, reminding them, people are excited about Jamborees in Memphis. Welcome, sir, to the 901. We get real excited. So just letting parents know we've got that covered. We will have more than enough security, I think, is what the board and what the public needs to hear. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Madam Superintendent, whether it's, again, I'll keep referring to whether we do this in closed session, open session. I think it's important that this body knows Plan B, Plan C, like in law enforcement often happens. I mean, this is concerning to have seen the what officers, the memo that circulated with officers willing to not show up that day. Again, whether it's the will of the board to speak this publicly or in private, I think it's personally and professionally we need to know what the plan B is in case that were to happen.
So I will share, and I'm not speaking for officers, but for something to take place as it did last year, there is just a general fear, not just from the public, and officers aren't afraid, but you can only see what you can see. You can only control what you can control. And so we could double the number of officers, and if something like that happens, then it's still mass chaos, right? And so I think what is being asked here, we can provide in terms of the numbers compared from last year to this year. The specific plan itself and how we plan to do a B and C and what happens if this, then those things we would have to share in a different space and setting. Is that fair?
What do you guys want to do?
So I'll speak briefly. What I do want to know, I want to have the reassurance, and that could be through a series of calls or executive session. What we need and the public needs is reassurance of safety.
Yeah.
We need reassurance that this event is going to be safe for participants, for employees, and we need our officers to be safe.
Yeah.
And so this is not a moment of board members to play gotcha, so I'm signaling to my colleagues, we should not be trying to ask you questions that you're not prepared to answer, but it's also not a moment for us to be guarded. Yeah. Like this is an opportunity. First of all, welcome to Memphis. A long history in doing this work. We need confidence right now that these officers have a leader that they know that they can count on, and that the folks who are going to show up at this event is going to be safe. And so, regardless of knowing and I think Mr. Calvo keeps wanting us, well, do we need to go into a special space? I don't want to leave this space, and if only for you to tell me I don't have an answer. So tell us either high level, what's the plan of activation of the event to make sure we're safe, and if we don't have that, is there a conversation that the board and superintendent should be having of whether or not we need to have the event?
Board Member Woods, I can assure you we've had discussions about this the last couple of days. I have directed Director Riley to provide me with an operations plan that will be detailed to make sure that we have done everything and checked every box to do our best to ensure the safety and the family atmosphere that this event deserves to have. To that end, I will assure that the manpower is what it needs to be, including I will be there myself on all 3 days to address any issues that may come arise that I can provide my leadership and guidance to. But I have full faith and confidence in Director Riley to execute this, and I will be there to support him in any way I can.
Where will you be?
I will hit every site. There's 5 sites on Thursday and 6 on Friday. 6 Thursday, 5 Friday, and then we have middle school on Saturday. I will hit every site. If any of the board members would like to coordinate, I can coordinate the sites that are in your area, and we can work on a time and we can walk it together. But I will assure you that you will see my face in the place. I enjoy high school athletics. It is one of the best parts of going to school, and every child should be able to enjoy that in a safe, family-friendly atmosphere. And that is what the Safety and Security Department is.
Thank you for that. I think this.
Finish, Michelle.
I'm sorry. Were you not? It sounded like his intonation was going down, which kind of signals that he was about to close for the moment. But
it's your mic.
The reason I'm just eager because Board Member Coleman and I recently returned from a school safety conference, and I think it's just incumbent upon the board that maybe another committee that needs to be added is school safety committee. And I learned a lot at that conference, and I think just things like everyone's got the new policies now of the clear bags, and just how do we go about educating our community of what they can do, what they should do, and what they shouldn't do to increase their safety at our school-sanctioned public events like the upcoming Jamboree Games. So those sorts of things are what I'm concerned about. So not just for right now, but this is a larger conversation for us to continue to have on what we can do. So just wanted to add that part of, even in between now and then, we need to tell folks, leave all your big backpacks and bags at home. That's
Yes,
what we
please.
need to be doing as a part of working with communications and, of course, our superintendent. And just to keep the board abreast of what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. So I think what is important here, like, I love the nice words and the sound bites and the assurance. One of my concerns is that we have explicit partnerships established from MPD and the Sheriff's Department in case officers were not to show up on the next 3 days. I know we saw the letter, right? They say, hey, we're going to walk away. We offer you move swiftly, you offer the pains increase, but they cited other concerns. So my question that I was going to ask in closed session is that we need to make sure, the district needs to make sure that in case that officers do not show up, that there is a plan, that there is a backup, a proactive backup from other law enforcement agencies that are ready to step in.
Sure. Thank you for the question, Board Member Calvo. In any instance, not just this one, there's always an additional plan, right? Because even if it wasn't the Jamboree, officers may not show up. Life happens, things happen, right? And so we always have a contingency plan in general. But in this case, yes, our partnerships with MPD and the Sheriff's Department continue to strengthen. And so certainly they are prepared, but they are also stretched, right? And so, yes, that exists. And certainly where we need them, things are taken care of. And so it is not sound bites. That's just what they do, and so they're able to share it with a level of confidence that maybe some of us wouldn't have, because this is what they do. It's their professional expertise. But I can assure the board that a plan does exist, can provide that to the board for sure, and certainly the numbers that you requested, Board Member Love, as well.
I have a couple of questions, but I'm going to save them to executive session. I want to know what the officers are complaining about and how you remedy those concerns. The board voted on a budget last year that included a $1,000 pay raise, a step increase, but somehow or another it got lost in this budget session. I am not blaming anyone, but somehow it got lost. Academics is first, safety is second. We need to make sure we address their concerns fully. That's all I have to say.
Would you like a response? I will share. Well, I'll leave that. Yes.
We need to send an, I need to see an email of what you did to rectify the problems.
So I went, if there were issues, whatever they were, I listened to issues that have existed well before my time with Director Riley. We listened, he expressed specifically some things, some overarching things. I think just in general, any of us, if you've been talking about a thing for a year or so, frustration is frustration. And so these conversations started a long time ago. You mentioned you don't know where it dropped. I learned of it when you learned of it, but when I learned of it, it was to kick into action. And so
I learned about it many, many months ago.
Well, I learned of it Friday night, so let me speak. I'll speak for me then. So I'll strike that from the record, and I will share that I learned of it from the news. And then I called a sergeant, and who called someone else. But I got it when a board member shared with me that Fox reached out, and then Fox reached out to me. So that's how I learned of it. I ultimately saw a string of emails Friday night at 7:08 p.m. when I received it via email. And then I have established relationships with some officers already, so I reached out to an officer directly, and then he provided context to me about how he arrived here. I think in general, frustration about communication, frustration about not being able to get to me for whatever those barriers were when I shared with them that they could talk to me anytime. They made that request, and for whatever reason it didn't make it to me, and so I've addressed that with administration and personnel. But those were some of the main issues. I named another issue earlier, which is there just aren't enough officers. And so we are stretching. There are central office staff in buildings, just like I shared that central office and the chair and others have gone to teach classes to meet the needs and the gaps that we have. So that was another opportunity in terms of just increasing the force itself. The other opportunity that I think was brought up was about something that I'm unable to do anything about right now, and I'd prefer to keep that off the record right now and share with you offline. But they understand that in terms of the directors, but that is something that is a push, but I will share that offline. But other than that, Director Riley, Mr. Harris, did I leave anything out that was mentioned? They assured me. I showed up this morning. We answered a couple of questions in general about early release from buildings, but I allowed them to handle that. I moved on out of the way just to ensure that they didn't have questions about the salary, and that generally took care of what was asked for. They were looking for the step. I went steps further and decreased it, and I shared that with you yesterday, and you were generally pleased as well.
I don't want an officer to be penalized for speaking up, and I don't want an employee to be penalized for speaking up. That is their responsibility to speak up for themselves. It is long overdue for the board to have, it is long overdue for our employees to be treated fairly. All of them. It is my hope and my commitment to you and to the employees that no harm comes to them from speaking up. I have heard some issues, but I'm not going to discuss them because I need proof. And then I will come to you.
Board Member Love, I know that the officer that's standing before you and the executive director that's standing before you as well, I think I have shared that very clearly. Now, that goes against the culture of paramilitary and law enforcement, but I have shared where there is an issue. If you have to jump someone to get to me or to get to someone else, then that is the expectation. So that will take a little bit, but the culture exists. Retaliation you would have to share with me or anything like that. But overall, I have shared that expectation very clearly, not just for instances like this not to happen, but overall, when there is a concern, there is a concern regardless of who it is with.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but all employees must go to the immediate supervisor before they can communicate to you. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I will say, because you've used the term wrong, I will say that you are wrong. I have never shared that. I have shared, they're looking at me now, I've shared the exact opposite, actually.
The policy states.
I don't know. Does it? Which policy?
I don't know.
Board Member Love.
The policy states that you are directed to go to your immediate supervisor, to your chain of command before you go to the superintendent.
If that is what it states, and again, somebody would have to share what the policy is. I think that is out of respect, though. So let me balance the conversation. The expectation is not that you jump straight to me. I can't handle all those emails, and he's gone now. But we talk about micromanaging. I can't handle all those emails. But more importantly, even when someone reaches out to me from a school, the opportunity has to be given to the school to handle it first. Have to give them an opportunity to fix it, to address it, and then if something is left unresolved, to raise it up. That is the same with officers. That is the same in the department. Give the respect to the individual that you have the issue with, even if it's not your immediate supervisor. Give them the opportunity to address, to understand, and to resolve. And then, if it is unsatisfactory, then you rise up, you raise up. I think that is the delicate balance. However, in any case, and specifically cases like this, where there was a roadblock, someone should have made it to me, and that did not happen. Yes, ma'am.
I would like to know the chain of command for the safety and security team. I don't want to hear it now.
I was about to say I can share that with you via a flow chart.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
And
With the full
who
board.
is responsible for the chain of command to you?
Yes.
I would like to know that in email.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Any more questions? This committee,
Board member Love.
yeah.
Since you have him up here, I do want to introduce him. Since we've just been talking with him, this is George Harris. He's the new executive director of safety and security. He's coming to us by way of Detroit. 29 years of law enforcement. Detroit Public Schools is the only district in the state of Michigan that has its own police force, law enforcement agency. He has small school experience, small district experience, and certainly with Detroit Police Department as well. So I just want to make sure I introduce him as he's been standing before the body.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome, ma'am.
Any more questions, comments? This meeting is adjourned.
Next committee?
All right, thank you. We're going to keep on flowing. If you need a stretch break at any point, you're more than welcome to. We're going to go right on to the academic committee meeting, and what I've asked of Superintendent Fagan is to give us a very high level, give us an update of where we are with the number of teacher vacancies. As we have just almost 7 days into the brand new 2024-2025 school year. So I think as a board, people are asking us those questions. I want to make sure we know accurate and correct answers. And so I'll stop and allow Dr. Fagans to speak, and then board members, you may ask questions when she finishes.
Okay. So overall, not much has shifted since we started the year, and we gave the last update July 31st at our last our board work session, or board business meeting. We still have several hundred vacancies. I won't give an exact number. We haven't run the numbers for today just yet. I do want to caution as we give the numbers, some of these are not true vacancies. So when we anticipate that we have an increase in enrollment, then we build out the number of vacancies that we need based on that enrollment. Right now, our enrollment is up from this time last year. We're at 101,681 students who are actually enrolled. We have an attendance rate of about 95.7%. That was as of yesterday. Haven't received the numbers for today just yet. And so we are trending upwards, if you will, in terms of our numbers. So with more students, our attendance rate is about 1% less than it was last year, but that's with more students. We are actively making outreach to our students to see where they are and updating our records accordingly. In terms of our vacancies, then we've already shared that most of those are with our exceptional education department. We still have nearly 100 vacancies in that particular department and area. It's our hardest to staff because you have to be certified in the area. We cannot use the permit route for that. Our second hardest to staff area would be our English speakers, our ESL population. And so we have several vacancies there, and then the vacancies just stretch out across our typical content area subjects. What we do continue to maintain is most of our vacancies being filled with a substitute, most of those being certified substitutes. And so when we talk about having certified teachers before our students, that still counts. Many of those are retired teachers who know it well, do it well, are still trying to get the chair to return to the classroom as well. But just including that, we do have about 96-97% of our vacancies filled, with a few lingering day to day. So our pre-K enrollment was not included in that 101,681 students. So that's more than 4,000 students not accounted for just yet. So we're sitting right at 106,000, just barely, with that number continuing to grow, and we anticipate it growing continuously. Our Ready Day 1, we do have some virtual engagement sessions coming up at the request of our parents, so that will continue to strengthen. We know we welcome back our pre-K students on this Monday, so they started back on the staggered schedule, so excited to see them in the classroom as well. And then overall, I think if there are particular questions, I'll take those, but we haven't gotten into the semester just yet. Our testing has started for iReady, so we anticipate having some true baseline scores and data as we move forward to measure from.
Thank you. Thank you, Superintendent. My question is, when we were in the thick of the pandemic and we, did an amazing job as a school district getting these devices into the hands of all of our students, or, 110,000 or so. And my thinking was, there were some silver linings to come out of the pandemic and how we were teaching virtually, whatever. Are there still options of having, certified virtual teachers? I mean, there are still students, because how it operated, there was someone physically there in the room, but then there were also certified virtual teachers, certified in a subject matter. And, pardon? Yeah, proximity learners. Thank you. That's the term I was looking for. So can that still be a role to play? Because as we are talking about being in the 21st century and preparing, I still have a ton of meetings virtually, even though we could have them in person. So is that something that we use for the pandemic that we can still possibly use to some degree, not to lean on it completely, but is that still room for that in our education space?
So, and I think I'll respond to that two ways. One, we use some of our current teachers who do that. So I can see Miss McKissick, but she's teaching in a different classroom in a different space. So not so much virtually where I'm looking on a screen at someone totally, unknown, but in my building or in another building. Some of that is happening in a few spaces right now. I think our better option, what we have arrived at now, and I've shared this with several of you already, is our voluntary instructional period option. And so this is where we have offered our teachers, or we will offer our teachers, the opportunity to utilize their planning period to take on an additional course that they're certified in. So I teach 5 classes already. They must have a full schedule. I will volunteer to say I will teach during my planning period for 1/6 of my daily rate. That guarantees a certified teacher is in front of all of our students. So took the baby steps to share it with principals first, to see their energy. They loved it, thought it was very innovative, forward thinking, can't wait to get it out. Had the conversation with several of you to get your ideas, to see if that would be a good way forward. That would be something you could support. Yes, there. That final step was to get it waived by the state, so submit the waiver for that, something they have not heard of, so they're interested in monitoring it, observing it, and seeing the results. This is something that I've done in a previous space and seen it work very well. Certainly the teachers love it because they get 1/6 of their daily rate, but we also have students who have a teacher, in this case, who has an LOE, their score, their evaluation of 3 or higher, so we know that they not only are experienced, but they understand the craft, if you will, to deliver. We're looking at it that way, board members, but Board Member McKissick specifically, because we have to think about the academic performance of our students. And so it would be wouldn't be wise of us to think that we are not also contributing to the performance that we have to a degree. Meaning that if a student starts out in Algebra 1 and they're looking at someone virtually, or they have several substitutes, we know the instability and what we can expect on the other side of that. So this way assures or ensures that someone who is certified in the building already, knows the subject area, and can be compensated for that work can do so. In addition to that, they can do it once more after school. And so that is 2 times during the day that you can take on, as Ms. McKissick, the teacher who teaches English, to take on a class from a vacant position so that we have our classes taken care of. We keep the vacancy as we stand up a firmer recruitment plan. I think we gave evidence of what that could look like with some of our hiring blitzes. But as we build that out for the year, recruitment is year-round, it gives us the opportunity to attract qualified individuals for the upcoming year. That also does not include, but just bringing back the reminder that we do anticipate bringing in several international teachers through our international recruitment plan in January. We just couldn't get them in right now. Only, I think, 5 or 7 or something were available, so we just shared they could all start in January. So that would also support as well.
I want to follow up on that, and what I heard from you, Superintendent, is a pecking order of preference as far as how you want or what you want to see in front of students. So, certified teachers, where does the virtual option sit on your list of deliverables? Is it as opposed to a substitute teacher, right? So obviously you have this pecking order. Say, hey, you made it very clear day one. We wanted 100% field position, and because you said that has to be the goal. It's not like, oh, we want 90%. We want to be at 100%. So when we're not there, I think in our first retreat, we asked the question, well, do we want to have, in the worst case scenario, we are in a situation where we didn't hit the 100% goal. We have this lever we can pull that says that, hey, we can access a virtual classroom in order for some instructions to continue to be happening. Speaking for my own kids, right? Like, I know they prefer to be in front of a great teacher, but you also have that that high-performing learner that says, you know what, give me the work, give me the time. If I have any questions, I can get an answer back from you. Where does this sit on your list, or does it simply not part of your ethos at all? Like, we don't believe in that model, and we simply won't use it? Because you did say that you put out a procurement process about virtual, and then you so I'm just curious, is it something that you plan to implement, or is like, nah, we're not doing that?
I appreciate that. Very direct.
Very
just let me
direct
be
question. Yeah, I mean, again,
I have not,
yeah.
I don't think that we've been, we haven't skirted around where virtual sits. And we talk about the pandemic, and it worked well then. It also burned our children out, right? And so when I listen to students, I also have to be mindful of their feedback, that sitting and looking at a screen, in their words, is not their preferred learning. But there are some students who just want to go, and they can do it, right? And so that does exist. It does not exist through proximity without continuing to name a vendor, but that's just what has been known. But we still have students who partake in that particular opportunity. There aren't as many, because the certified teacher before them, the live person before them, the engagement, the relationship, the interaction, that also goes into and contributes to the type of experience that our students have. It contributes to attendance and students choosing to skip those particular classes. When we look at the data and where students are going, they're in the building, but not in that class. And so I think as we took visits during the VIP tours, those were some of the things that stood out to some of you. What is this class, and where are the students? And how can we sharpen this? That was the RFP going out at the request of some board members. Can we put it back out there for additional platforms and vendors to have the opportunity to position themselves for this particular way forward? Certainly our virtual schools still exist, and we have parents and families, or families and students, who have chosen that option as well. And so that still exists for virtual also.
Yeah, so thank you for that. So I want to be clear, at least for myself, I don't prefer virtual learning, neither for my children, but if left to no other options, it's what worked during COVID, and it's what eventually got one to college. But my point is that I think left up to no other options, let's let's make sure that all tools are in the toolkit, right? So if we need to launch that as a platform, like I don't think we should have a situation where a classroom is not being covered. When we say we have vacancies, I assume that means they're being covered by at least a substitute, right? That's right. And so is there learning happening there? And is that, I know we did get some data back from the administration that obviously students grew faster with the certified teacher as opposed to virtual learning, but I don't think we ever got any data on substitute versus virtual learning. It would be great to see if they're at par and substitute is cheaper, then you've just made the case that, just get anybody that fog a mirror then is better than the other options. But just curious to know if there's data to support doing something different. And obviously that doesn't say slow down at all on looking for teachers to fill the classroom. I think you shared that with Ms. McKissick. So thank you.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's always best to have someone in person, but I'm sure there's been some reports on the media the last few days about, a rotation of substitutes or whatever. But just, looking at all the various options that we may have as a district.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to be clear that we value substitutes, right? And so I don't want to toss it, and I don't want it to be perceived as though we're saying there's something wrong with having, being able to use substitutes. They are certified, and so that does matter. But we are looking for certified full-time teachers who can be there 180 days, barring the days they take off, to be before our students. Virtual learning, as we think about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it is in that 4 or 5, and I think everyone understands why, but it is not off the table. Yeah.
Switching gears, the central office staff, did you include them in a PD development and onboarding process before you made everybody go back to schools?
I think what you're asking is for those who were at central office before they were in schools, if they elected to go back in schools, did they receive a level of training?
Yeah.
Everyone participated in training during Leadership Institute Week, which was the week of July 17th.
Yeah.
Yes.
Who is over the staff at the schools? The principal or the administration?
Direct oversight goes to the principal of the school. If I'm misunderstanding, will you give me additional context?
The principal is in charge of every employee at that school, whether they are part-time or full-time.
For the most part, yes, and I share it as a response that way because we have like social workers who float in and out of several buildings, and they don't report directly to the principal. There are a couple of other positions, but for the most part, everyone in the building reports directly to the principal.
And the last question, what if the school doesn't have any room for the central office staff to be located in their building?
When you say central office staff, are you sharing because that's where they are housing themselves as an office?
Yeah.
Then we need to find them an office. We have plenty of room. If you can share that with me, I can address it.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Last thing for me, Superintendent, instead of just spending information in, information out, while you have the floor, is there anything that we can be helping with, particularly on the academic side, as far as, in addition to championing the message, encouraging employees as we see them out doing the work, anything else that you want to inform us of or that we can help with, particularly in the lanes of academics?
I think your questions are always on par with providing the public insight to the decisions, but certainly continuing to support the work that is happening. I know we talk a lot about like the challenges, the issues, what's going wrong.
Right.
So just continuing to value, that great work is happening, and sometimes that gets lost.
Yeah.
And ensuring that we are creating the type of system that is excellent excellent, right? Because we know that's what everybody wants, and certainly what is desired. Also, in terms of, I know you're talking about advocacy, but I think you know that I believe that safety is achievement and infrastructure is achievement. Everything is achievement, and so the board's voice or voices individually and collectively are important. So as we start to bring some things to use your voices, and as we develop our legislative, I know you're going to be parting ways soon, but still contributing to what that could sound and look like is incredibly important. I think this year is instrumental for us as we assert ourselves more. Statewide for sure, just even reaching out and establishing the relationship with the commissioner now has proven helpful for us to get these quick waivers, to get these quick turnarounds, and to get the support from the state that we've needed, ensuring that we receive the dollars from ASD. All those things are important. And so I think right now, that's what's most important if I'm hearing from teachers and from staff, is that we are doing a lot of things well as we work on, the gaps and the opportunities.
Thank you for that. I think I'll close with the fact that, like over the summer, I think it was much easier for us to get our proactive message out there to talk about your vision and the things that you want for the district. And then often day one, as was expected, the challenges is what's going to lead the day. And I often tell previous superintendents that I don't feel that my job is to talk about the 99% of the things you do well. It's to take the 1%, my limited time to talk about the 1% of the challenges so we can cascade that out publicly. So I appreciate Calvo's and others' points of pausing at this moment to particularly thank the staff and the team for a week well done. Even in the challenges, you have folks that are stepping in the gaps, doing great work. And I think that's much of what our conversation is about, is to continue to thank those individuals who are really doing the heavy lifting, and to know that we got their backs, and anything we can do to support you and them, we want to be there for you guys. So I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. We did. We had a really great week, a really great first week, and I shared that with the team at the end. I also said rest because we worked long hours, but we had a really great first week. From attendance, I know that the air led the week, and that was not the goal, which we talked about it in conversations, like I don't want the air to lead the week, and of course the air led the day. But that's what happens. But a team that had a plan, we weren't surprised by it. We thought through it. And so I am thankful for a team who continues to be agile and adaptable, and also thinking forward about how we move forward, but also just being really transparent about what we have, in our hands. So I appreciate that.
I have a question, Superintendent. Of the 200, you say 200 some vacancies we have, how many of those are tied up in HR? Because I get calls all the time stating that they're waiting on a teacher, that HR has got paperwork lost, paperwork that they submitted that they don't have now. I went into school yesterday, and the teacher was walking out crying because she had done everything and was told to report yesterday, and she did. And she got there, and HR called. The principal knew nothing about it. So of those, how many? And of our children that are, I'm not going to say missing, that are not accounted for right now, how many of those are due to vacancy? Because I want to share with you a personal experience. I have a grandson that just started school today because I didn't use Joyce Doris Coleman, the board commissioner. I used Joyce Doris Coleman, the grandmother, to find out. My son is in the my grandson, is ninth grade. I reached out to 2 different schools, and because he went to Believe Academy last year, it was a holdup. It was a holdup. And this is something Michelle and I were talking about when we were at the safety conference. How many of our children walk the streets because nobody, they have nowhere to go? So I want to know, of the vacancies that we have, for whatever reason they are, how are we accounting for the teachers that are not getting onboarded or not getting their process done? And how many of our children are missing out on getting their education because somebody is not in the seat to help get that child registered? I'm talking about personal. Not get that child registered not find out what it takes to get that paperwork. What are we doing about these things? Yeah, that's the same silence I've had for a week.
Well, I want to be measured in my response because I meet with the talent management team, multiple times a week. We have contributed to the delay. The team is working hard, and hard is not enough, if I'm okay to say that. And they honestly probably couldn't give more time. They work Saturdays and Sundays. They're working several hours. The system that we use right now, which you will see an RFP come before you, is not best suited for the work for our organization. I'll say it that way. And so we are managing a lot of things manually. And I think we all understand that in an organization of this size, doing things manually is never going to work. And so we've lost a lot of individuals in the process in terms of those who could have filled vacancies. I think that is also the answer to when you mention about your grandson and those who are not in the seat just yet. When I ask about the 5,000 to 7,000 or so students that we're not seeing just yet enrolled, and then the nearly 17,000 or so who are not showing up yet. We already have schools where our chronic absenteeism has already caught my eye. And so I understand what you're asking. In terms of what we do about it, it takes a combination of streamlining our processes. We have to get a new system, which you've heard me share about an RFP coming for that. And then certainly it is about sharpening the staff that we have.
Superintendent, you ever considering hiring some more folks?
They have interviews scheduled Thursday. Yes, ma'am. We had, I think, 71 applicants for one of those positions and 112 or 17 for another position. But those interviews are...
One position?
So these are 8 positions, but they're 2 separate titles in that department.
How many workers do you have for compensation and onboarding the employees?
Is it still... I'd have to see what the numbers are right now. I don't want to give you a wrong number because the media is here, but I'll give you the right number as soon as we conclude. I want to give you the number that I have in my head, but let me check it.
To last year.
Then I'll definitely have to check that. Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to follow up with that on, I mean, we're definitely have gone through some growing pains over the last several weeks, and as we've adjusted, 2 things. One, there are concerns like for some schools who had depended on the seat office for uniform vouchers, and that kind of fell through the cracks, I think, a little bit this year, where they're seeing the impact of that, of students showing up who simply don't have the means. And apparently there weren't uniform vouchers that were handed out this year. That's one thing. The second thing I just want to comment on is we contracted with a company, CASA K-12, to go and find students. And so I'm not sure how familiar you are with that, but I don't need an answer right now. But you know, what are they doing and how are they doing with their efforts to find the students that are out there missing? So just I would love to have an update from them on how it's going. Thank you.
I'm going to jump in and say to Commissioner McKissic's response, I had a call Sunday night from someone who needed, 3 students need to go to school, but we didn't have uniform vouchers. In the past, I've been able to pick up the phone and call and say, hey, I got this family. I had to send them somewhere where they got free uniforms. And so I don't know why we thought we didn't need to have uniform vouchers. But we have to understand the families that we serve. Some of them can't afford to buy uniforms. Some of them didn't know until the last minute that schools were not going to be a uniform. So they have, you know, all kinds of reasons. But if we really want to find these students and get them in school, we got to talk to parents to see what they need. And we're going to have to be standing here to help with uniforms and to help. You know, I know we got the backpack ministry down. Everybody got backpacks, but something as simple as uniforms. This is the first year that I've known us not to. Last year, we had a whole Walmart store over there. We worked half a day over there with parents getting everything. Sherman, I know that's a painful memory. Everything they needed, it was over there. To this year, you know, we have the vouchers. So, Superintendent, I know we have to make cuts. Tito, I know there are tough decisions to make, but I pray we go back and revisit that.
Chair, I appreciate that, but I will have to correct. We don't give vouchers for uniforms. We have uniforms, and so those have been issued. I'd be curious to know who was requesting a voucher. You don't need a voucher for the uniform. We give vouchers for our houseless families or those who are experiencing, you know, houselessness, but to receive a uniform, you don't need it. You could go to the Welcome Center.
We had vouchers.
We had vouchers.
You could get a voucher, go to.
So previous year, someone would have to speak to that because
I'm
I haven't
speaking
seen
to it. In the past, we
administration.
had vouchers where you could take a voucher and go to the uniform shop. And I know it was one in Southland Mall and one in Raleigh Springs Mall. You could take it and go in there and get 3 uniforms for your child.
I'm going to let someone from previous administration speak to it. I haven't seen a voucher since I arrived. Yes, ma'am. I hear you, though.
Lori was over it last year.
Dr. Whitelow is about to speak.
Thank you, Superintendent Fagans. Basically, what we did on this year, this year we did change. So I wanted to make sure that we have uniforms and the homeless has the vouchers that we did for the houseless students. Also, some of our schools also have closets that we can give to as well. And we have free uniforms at the supply giveaway. So that was a change from what we've done in the past. So I wanted to make sure that is a change, that was a change. And what we did, we gave away the uniforms, but also kept the vouchers for our houseless students.
Is there a way, just, you know, I know as we are still, because that message didn't get to all schools, to maybe have like a second tier of, you know, here we are 2 weeks in, you know, if you somehow missed it, is there some way to kind of fill that gap?
That's exactly what I was sharing. As you can see, I'm being enlightened as well, which should not be the case. However, it is the case, and so we'll make sure we get that communication out to be very clear about how we can support our families. I do know that outreach has been going out from our family engagement liaisons as well at our schools and our attendance liaisons. But to Board Member Coleman's, I mean, I was on the phone with her when she was shopping for uniforms, so I'm sure if she'd known, then we could have supported as well. But we'll make sure we get that extra layer of communication out very clearly about how our families can be supported specifically in that regard. Yes, ma'am.
Board needs to be abreast of the changes in the district. We are all elected officials, and my phone rings daily from parents and teachers. This is the first I'm hearing about this. A school called me just this a couple of hours ago.
So there are no uniforms at the school, Dr. Whitelaw, because schools are asking for allocations to help with the closed closet. So I know for a fact there are schools who do not have uniforms to give.
We need to know the changes in our districts, and the administration needs to communicate with us. we shouldn't be having this discussion at 5:30, 6 o'clock.
So Superintendent, before you
Yes.
you respond to that, what I don't want you to find yourself in is thinking that in any way we're going to bat 100% on the communication. What I ask my colleagues, and especially if the new board members are listening, it's incumbent upon us in real time. I can speak to Dr. Richmond and that team of folks parents who ask questions. I knew you were visiting schools, but I knew in seconds his team was responding back and getting answers back on things I needed to know, or at least pointing me in the right direction on where to get those answers. I think if I have an issue where a parent doesn't know wear a uniform, we have seasoned people that still work here. I guarantee you they would have reported that to us in real time, immediately, and then as opposed to at 5:49, we're now all been educated. All the schools who did not know would have learned in real time. So that's where I do remind us that it's still a partnership. I think while we want to make sure the district improve on its communication, that we own that fact that we're real-time problem solvers, and when constituents have issues, we don't hoard them, stack them high, and spit them out and keep us here to 6 o'clock, right? We're like, hey, and I know that's not what you guys are doing, but I promise you, we can educate the rest of the team. Hey, FYI, here's how the voucher system works now. So I'm just giving that as feedback for all of us to take back to make sure that when we learn something, cascade it to the whole body.
To answer the question, I communicated with Rosalind,
Vincent.
Erin.
Oh, Dr. Lester.
And she told me Robin was over it before the meeting.
Robin, get over here.
Ms. Stevenson.
Ms.
Rosalind.
Stevenson. I communicated with Erin before the meeting, and she told me, what is your name? Rosalind Stevenson was over it.
Can I say something to what Kevin said? Kevin, every day last week, I reached out. Every day, 2, 3, 4 times a day. I called other people to get other people's names. Because if you remember, I asked when we first started this over 2 months ago that we wait before we made a lot of cuts. I have had to stay at home. I have had to do things with a grandson because no one was there to answer. That's me. How many more parents are in this same situation? So communication goes both ways. I have reached out. I had another situation. I called Dr. Richmond. He took care of that one. But when I don't know who to talk to, how can I tell my constituents who to call? I didn't know who to call about uniforms. So guess what I did? I went out and I bought them. Am I asking for money? No. So it goes both ways. The communication has to be given as well as taken. But when there's nobody you call, that Saturday when we were over at the Sportsplex, the few people from registration were registering kids. She took about 20 minutes then trying to help me. And I said, out of respect, I'm going to let you work on somebody else. Call me on Monday. So it has to be done right.
I just have one last question. Michelle Stewart, you don't have to answer it today, but you can email it to me. Somewhere I was last week at a school, and I touched a fire extinguisher, and it felt like it was empty. Do we have an up-to-date report on the monitoring of fire extinguishers, our fire systems, and if not, get that information? Well, I did fall on it, but anyway, get it to me is what I'm saying. I just want to know that all of that is, Kevin, you would have been trying to bill me for it. But anyway, I just want to know that we are doing what we need to do, making sure that everything is inspected and we're good everywhere. I know it's a lot going on right now, but I just want to make sure the things we normally would have done over the summer, that we make sure we get those things done. Thank you, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question for you. Next month, we are going to, my zoning enrollment in my district is messed up. And I have had this conversation with you numerous of times. The principals are complaining year after year. I need for you to sit down with me and go through step by step the zoning requirements in Power School and the locator. I had a cousin that enrolled in Raleigh Egypt Elementary last week. She has been staying at the same address for 6 years, and she was diverted to Keystone Elementary School. All of her kids went to Raleigh Egypt Elementary. For 6 years, she has been staying in the same address. I need you to get some time on your schedule to walk me through zoning, and I understand we did a zoning requirement 6 years ago when an ASD took over a school in my district. But those kids are graduated. What policies can we bring back? And do the board have to make a recommendation so my principals can stop calling me respectfully for the same situations year over year? I don't have no problems with the principals calling me. Let's just make that clear. But years are passing, and I don't have an answer for them.
Thank you. I think the last thing that I have, and 3 minutes and I'm through, I'm giving each one of you a copy of the superintendent's evaluation process. Nothing has really changed because she's due an evaluation in November, and we have new board members coming, but I think with this board, it is up on us to look at this. If you have any suggestions, you have any recommendations or anything, text me, call me, email me, right? Because I want to be able to bring it back next week. Kevin, go.
Is yours regarding this?
Yeah. I have been asking for this for years. I want the superintendent's evaluation to be mirrored to that of the principal and her staff and everything. No more can we, the time is out for the teachers to get evaluated, and they listen to the administration. The teachers don't make nothing but their lesson plan, and teachers are penalized year over year for doing the job they have been instructed to. The superintendent gives out the evaluations to her members, and the members follow the superintendent's evaluations and her recommendations. I am asking for that to be included in this evaluation process.
Yes, ma'am.
That's all.
You'll be here for the next 4 years. I hear you. But my recommendation is that by August 31st, when some of us leave, we will have a process for them to at least have something to work with for November. And then they have time before that next evaluation is done in June. Whatever it is that need to be adjusted, that will be something that you will be able to take care of. I appreciate you, Ms. Love. You sound like you're volunteering for the evaluation team, but we appreciate it.
I will.
Madam Chair, just a quick correction per Superintendent Fagan's contract. That date is in October, in which that she is scheduled to be evaluated. So having this conversation, particularly with 5 members returning, at least is important, and obviously the superintendent needs to be involved in that process. On letter C, you have staff relations accounting for 20%. I think too often, I've always argued that this evaluation tool is very subjective. It's whether or not, the superintendent, took me for coffee or not, and I think it needs teeth. Eventually, you need real goals, real objectives, measurable.
But you get to take it home and make all of those observations.
But in case we don't, in case other new board members are listening, I'm specifically speaking to staff relations, which is the 20% goal, and just something for us to think about is that I often think about the silent majority. We all hear, the banter around the unhappy folks, and they may be the majority, but really we're all just guessing at it. And so I just remind colleagues that I did mention to superintendent that we need a culture climate tool where we can actually get a real pulse of the district. Ideally, we would have done that prior to any seismic changes, so we get a baseline. So whenever this board decides to adopt such a tool, it will be a test of this new administration. But year over year, regardless of how low or how high that number is, you just want to improve on that. If we were doing culture climate surveys, we would not be surprised by the officers. We would not be surprised how any division is feeling, thinking, doing, because we would have measured that. Those reports would come back before the board, and we then would instruct our superintendent to act. I am signaling to the returning board members that if this is part of the evaluation tool, you need an instrument to actually measure how staff are actually feeling about this organization, and otherwise we're going to continue to be guessing.
Duly noted.
Well, thank you guys for your attention.
I have a question for you. Tito.
If your name doesn't get called by Ms. Love today, she's holding it to the work session, but go ahead.
This is the last week of the people who were let go. Do you anticipate anyone getting unemployment? And do you have a contingency plan for people that's wanting unemployment?
Board member Love, great question. Actually, we do have a contingency plan. But it was always related to the cliff of Esther. So what we've been doing over the past few years financially is been building an unemployment fund, but it had nothing to do specifically related to what happened recently, only because good CFOs, knowing that it was going to be an Esther cliff, we've been building, putting money in the unemployment fund, knowing that at some point we was going to have a cliff of Esther. So to answer your question, yes, we have been planning for it. Do I anticipate it? Yes. I mean, to some degree or some level, there's going to be some people impacted that won't come back to the district and may not have a job. So again, preparing for unemployment to rise, and we've added money to the unemployment fund. We've anticipated. I don't have the exact number now. I know probably more at the end of this pay period, but yeah, we anticipate it.
Thank you. Get it to me as soon as you have it.
Thank you. That was everything? That wasn't too bad. 3 hours.